I hadn't touched the guideline or a harness in years, not since I left that part of my life behind. After what happened in the cathedral caverns, after I saw what a collapsing tunnel could do to a person, I'd sworn off cave diving for good. I thought I meant it. That was before I found the hole. It was late afternoon when I first noticed it. I'd been exploring the property, familiarizing myself with every hill and twist in the creek. I'd wandered farther than usual, down a slope covered in thick underbrush, where the ground dipped into a shallow depression. I thought it was a natural dip where the rain had eroded the soil. But as I stepped closer, I noticed the rock. The earth had crumbled away from a limestone ridge, exposing something beneath it. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was looking at. The rock had collapsed inward. It used to be an entrance. I crouched down, brushing away loose dirt. What looked like a simple dip in the ground was actually a blocked-off passageway. Limestone had tumbled down from above, sealing whatever lay beyond. A cave. I leaned forward, peering through the rubble. A small hole, just barely big enough to fit a fist through. The cold air drifted out, stagnant and unmoving. I grabbed a handful of loose stones and pulled them away, clearing the hole a little more. The darkness inside was absolute. I reached for my flashlight and flicked it on. The beam cut into the hole, but not far. The angle was too tight to see anything beyond the first few inches. I sat back on my heels. This wasn't on my property map. I had checked before buying the land. The agency had provided detailed topography listing all the significant features. The stream, the rock formations, even a few shallow caverns further west. But this was nowhere. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. After a moment, I clicked on the number for the real estate office. The line clicked, and after a few rings, a woman answered. "Westwood Realty, this is Karen." "Hey, this is..." I paused, realizing I hadn't spoke to anyone from the office since I bought the place. I bought the land off Route 12 last year, the 10-acre lot." "Of course, how's it treating you?" "Good, yeah," I hesitated. "Listen, I was out exploring today, and I found something that wasn't on the survey. Looks like a cave, or at least it was. It's collapsing, but there's still an opening." A pause. "A cave?" "Yeah, a pretty big one from what I can tell." I expected concern, a legal warning maybe, some spiel about liability and state protections. Instead, she just sounded confused. "Huh, that's strange. We should have that in the records." "I checked the maps. It's not there." "Well, sometimes the surveyors miss things," she sighed. "If it was collapsed when they did the land inspection, they probably didn't think much of it." That made sense, I guess. "Is it stable?" she asked. "Seems like it." "Then I wouldn't worry about it. These lands are full of little pockets like that. Nothing dangerous." Her tone was light, unconcerned, like this was just another quirk of the landscape. Maybe she was right. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through my contacts. There was only one person I could call. Ryan. Ryan answered on the second ring. "Jeez, man, I thought you died or something. You were acting so weird after Cathedral Caverns." I smirked. "Nope, still breathing." There was a pause. I could hear the clatter of dishes in the background. He was probably at the bar he worked at, killing time between shifts. He always said he was going to move on from that place, but somehow never did. "So, what's up?" he asked. I glanced back at the hole. "You're not going to believe what I just found." Ryan showed up later that evening, grinning like a kid at Christmas the second he saw the collapsed entrance. "You're telling me this isn't marked?" he asked, running his fingers over the weathered limestone. "Not on any of the surveys." He flicked his eyes to mine, filled with that familiar, hungry gleam, the same one that had dragged me into dozens of near-death experiences over the years. "Then we've got a virgin cave." I nodded. "And it's ours." We wasted no time. With gloved hands and a couple of shovels, we started tearing into the rubble. It was slow work. The limestone was packed tightly, fused together by time and pressure. Every time we loosened a slab, dust billowed up in clouds, making the air thick and dry. After about an hour, we had widened the opening to the size of a watermelon. "Think we can fit?" Ryan asked. I shook my head. Not yet. The rock walls squeezed in too tight, like a mouth refusing to open. We kept digging. By the time the sun was bleeding into the tree line, the hole had grown wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Barely. Ryan crouched beside it, wiping sweat from his forehead. He grinned at me, then reached into the darkness. "Cold as hell," he muttered. I crouched beside him and placed my own hand near the opening. He was right. The air inside was several degrees cooler. I couldn't stop smiling. Ryan clapped me on the shoulder. "You ready to get back to work?" I looked at the entrance, at the blackness swallowing the last of the daylight, and I said, "Let's do it." I crouched at the entrance, my headlamp casting a weak glow into the hole we'd spent hours widening. Now that we were here, now that we were actually about to go in, I felt a twinge of nerves. That familiar pulse of adrenaline, the kind that came with knowing we were about to step into somewhere completely untouched. Ryan exhaled behind me, adjusting the strap on his harness. Man, I miss this feeling. I gave him a sideways glance. The feeling of what? Voluntarily wedging yourself into a crack in the ground? He laughed, slapping a hand against my shoulder. "You can take the man out of cave diving, but you can't take the cave diving out of a man." I just shook my head, taking one last look at the sky before lowering myself onto my stomach. The entrance was small. Even with all the digging, it was barely wider than my shoulders, forcing me to extend both arms straight as I inched forward. The first few movements were easy. Gravel and loosened stones shifted under my weight as I pushed myself deeper. Then the space tightened. The limestone pressed against my ribs, squeezing inward. My chest was compressed just enough that I had to time my breathing carefully, exhaling as I pushed forward, inhaling only when I gained enough ground. I kept my headlamp tilted straight ahead, my hands groping for the next available rock to pull myself through. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. I heard Ryan grunt behind me as he followed. "Tight fit." "Yeah," I muttered. My voice felt too loud in the enclosed space. Every breath, every scrape of fabric against stone, every shift of weight seemed amplified, bouncing off the rock in muffled echoes. A few feet ahead, the tunnel widened slightly. Not enough to stand, but enough to move a little easier. My heart pounded with excitement as I pulled myself forward, my elbows scraping against the rough stone. Then, a drop. The tight squeeze suddenly gave way to open space, the ground beneath me sloping downward. I slid forward with it, my stomach flipping as I tumbled a few feet before catching myself. My boots skidded against stone, my hands finding purchase just in time to stop myself from going further. Ryan's voice filtered through the tunnel behind me. "You good?" I took a moment to catch my breath, then grinned up at him. "You're gonna love this." By the time Ryan wriggled through and dropped down beside me, I had already turned my headlamp outward, scanning the space ahead. And what I saw made my breath catch. The cavern was huge. The ceiling arched high above us, its surface lined with jagged stalactites that shimmered faintly under our lights. The walls were textured with ripples of mineral deposits, patterns left behind by ancient underground water flow. And at the center of it all, stretching across uneven rock floor, was a pool of crystal clear water. Ryan let out a low whistle. Holy. We'd explored a lot of caves together over the years, but there was something different about this one. It was pristine. Finding untouched caves isn't all that rare, but one this large? He turned to me, grinning wide. Dude, we might have just found something historic. I exhaled. Yeah. I couldn't stop looking. The whole place was surreal, like a cathedral hidden beneath the earth, frozen in time. But there was something else too, something I couldn't quite put into words. The weight of the air. I shook off the feeling and reached for my guideline. We had done this hundreds of times before. It was second nature. In unfamiliar caves, you always marked your way back. A thin, unspooling rope anchored at the entrance and carefully fed through the chambers we explored, a lifeline in case things went south. I tied the first anchor point, securing the line to a sturdy rock formation. Ryan double-checked it, giving the rope a few firm tugs. Satisfied, we turned back to the cave ahead. The deeper we went, the more alien the cave became. Some of the stalagmites rising from the floor were twisted, like rope caught in a slow-motion spiral. Others were hollowed out, punctured with small holes as if something had bored through them. Not water erosion, something else. Ryan ran a hand over one. I've never seen formations like these. I nodded, tracing a beam of light across a nearby column. The rock was smooth in some places, almost polished, but in others, it was rough and cracked like dried skin. It wasn't natural, not entirely. And then, I noticed the bones. Not whole skeletons, just individual pieces. A jawbone stripped of teeth, a few vertebrae, so small I almost mistook them for pebbles. Some were tiny, rodent-like, some were longer, thicker. Ryan crouched beside me, picking one up. He turned it over in his palm, running his thumb along the brittle edge. Think an animal got trapped down here? I shrugged, but my stomach felt tight. I guess so. The entrance caved in, so it makes sense that something got trapped in here. We fell quiet for a second, inspecting the bones on the ground, taking our time to soak in the details of this place. As I set a particular piece of a jaw I'd picked up back down, I heard a small sound somewhere in our vicinity. I tapped Ryan on the shoulder, pointing toward the source of the sound, right behind a rock. A soft, hollow sound, like something tapping against stone. Ryan swung his flashlight toward the sound, and I caught the briefest glimpse of something in the dust. Not much, just a shifting of loose sediment, like the vibration of something deep beneath the earth. I exhaled sharply, pushing away the thought. I'd been in plenty of caves where sound bounced strangely, where simple noises warped into something unsettling. Ryan let out a breath and grinned. Man, your paranoid self hasn't changed a bit. I shook my head, forcing a smirk. Just saying, something brought those bones down here. Ryan rolled his eyes and stepped ahead. That was when the flashlight beam hit some sort of drawings. I had seen petroglyphs before, markings carved into rock by early humans, their history preserved in jagged etchings and faded pigments. But those had always been where you'd expect them, shallow caves near water sources, figures with spears, bows, fire. They were carved crudely but skillfully, their stick-like limbs raised toward animals, deers, birds, what looked like bison, the kind of thing you'd see in any prehistoric cave art. But then the drawings changed. The next few figures were running from something. It was depicted as a mess of lines, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. A large figure. Body distorted, its shape was hard to define, as though whoever had carved it had tried and failed to capture what they had seen. Ryan traced his fingers over the grooves in the rock. He was quiet, his eyes gleaming at the drawings in front of us. The images continued. The smaller figures fought it. They jabbed at it with spears, torches. In some scenes, the creature was shown bleeding, dark streaks of pigment smeared across the stone. But it never fell. And then, the final series of drawings. The figures were no longer fighting. They started fleeing, and they were being chased. The smaller figures had been forced into a cave, their forms hunched and terrified, and standing at the entrance, blocking their way out, was it. And in the final carving, at the very bottom of the panel, was a single figure alone, trapped inside the cave. I took a step back. Neither of us spoke for a few moments. The only sound was our own breathing, and somewhere distant, the faintest hint of dripping water. I swallowed and turned my light toward Ryan. How old do you think this is? He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice had lost its cocky edge. I'm not too sure. Think our ancestors had a few too many of the wrong mushrooms and got themselves trapped in a cave. We put a marker down and kept moving. We stopped at the edge of the passage, staring into the darkness ahead. The wall in front of us had a split in it. Not tiny by any means, but we'd have to squeeze ourselves through. Before I could respond, he was already pushing himself into the passage, head first, arms tucked in close. His boots scraped against the stone as he wriggled forward, his body quickly swallowed by the tunnel. I shook my head, muttering under my breath, "Reckless asshole." But I followed. My back scraped against the ceiling, my ribs pressed against the cold limestone. The walls were rough, biting into my gear as I inched forward. Ryan's voice drifted from up ahead, muffled by the narrow space. "Not so bad, right?" I grunted. "Says the guy who's not claustrophobic." He laughed. I tumbled out. The flashlight clipped to my chest swung wildly, its beam dancing across the cavern walls. I took a deep breath, stretching my arms. It felt good to be out. Ryan dusted himself off, glancing back at the passage. Tighter than I thought, but hey, we made it. We were at yet another massive open space, not too dissimilar from the clearing we'd just come from. But still, it was beautiful. Our trance was broken by a sharp, hollow sound. It echoed through the chamber, faint but distinct. A wheezing noise. We both froze. Ryan turned his flashlight toward the passage behind us. "What was that?" I swallowed. "Probably just, rock shifting." Even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The cave was silent. No tremors, no signs of movement, nothing to suggest a shift in the stone. The sound had come from somewhere. Ryan exhaled through his nose. "Yeah, probably." Neither of us moved for a long moment, just listening. The sound didn't come again. I forced a breath. "Let's keep moving." We spread out, shining our lights along the cavern walls. And then Ryan said, "Whoa, over here." I turned. My brain didn't register what I was looking at. Just a collection of pale, broken shapes nestled against the cavern wall. But as I stepped closer, the details came into focus. It was a skeleton, human in shape, but larger and thicker. The skull was broader, the ribcage wider, more robust. I knelt beside it, brushing away a layer of dust. The bones were ancient, and some were snapped clean. Ryan whistled, crouching beside him. "Damn, looks like a Neanderthal skeleton or something." I didn't respond. I was staring at the ribcage. It was shattered, and the entire skeleton was covered in gnaw marks. Ryan saw them too. His grin faded. Something ate this thing. My mouth felt dry. Yeah. We both turned our flashlights toward the tunnel behind us, the place where we'd heard the wheezing. For the first time since we'd entered the cave, I felt uneasy. The sound came back faint at first, barely audible over the steady drip of water somewhere deeper in the cave. But it was closer this time. Ryan stiffened beside me, his flashlight beam trembling against the cavern wall. I turned my flashlight toward the tunnel we had just crawled through. It was a black void, barely wider than a person. Nothing moved. Then, my light flickered. Movement. A blur of motion in the corner of my eye, something shifting behind the rock formations at the far end of the cavern. It was fast. Ryan saw it too. He inhaled sharply, stepping back. Dude. My flashlight flickered again, the beam shrinking, dimming. Ryan's did the same. And then it rushed us. It didn't make a sound. 1 second, the cavern was empty. The next, something lunged from the darkness, a twisted shape skittering across the uneven stone. My flashlight caught a glimpse of it, just a fraction of a second before it exited the beam's field of view. Skin stretched too tight, pale, patchy, like something molted but never fully regrew. Ryan screamed. The thing hit him hard, knocking him sideways. He slammed against the rock, his flashlight spinning across the cavern floor. I scrambled backward, my boots slipping on loose gravel. My chest heaved. I was fighting to process what I had just seen, what I thought I had seen. Ryan groaned, clutching his arm. Blood dripped onto the stone. The creature didn't linger. It was gone in an instant, retreating into the tunnels, disappearing between the rock formations like it had never been there at all. Only one sound remained. That mocking wheeze somewhere just out of sight. Ryan sat up, teeth gritted in pain. His sleeve was shredded, blood seeping through the fabric. I couldn't tell how deep the cut was, but the way his arm trembled, I could tell he was definitely rattled at the very least. I reached for his shoulder. "You okay?" He exhaled sharply, flexing his fingers. "Yeah, just a scratch." His voice was unsteady. I turned my flashlight back toward the tunnels. Nothing, just stone and shadow. Ryan forced a breath and pushed himself up. "We need to get out, now." We turned back toward the tunnel we had crawled through. And somewhere behind us, somewhere in the dark, the wheezing started again. We ran. Not in a frantic way. We simply couldn't. The way the cave was laid out, we could easily slip and fall on jagged rocks. We had to move carefully. But we moved as fast as we could. Ryan's breath was ragged beside me, and his boots scraped loudly against the cavern floor as he stumbled. I kept throwing glances over my shoulder, expecting to see something moving in the dark behind us. But there was nothing. The wheezing kept echoing from somewhere deep within the tunnels. Distant, then closer, then distant again. It was toying with us. We reached the opening to the passage we had come through, the narrow gap that would take us back to the chamber where we'd found the drawings. The guideline was still there, keeping us on track. Relief crashed into me so hard I nearly collapsed against the wall. We could still get out. Ryan didn't wait. He grabbed the rope and hauled himself forward, pulling himself into the narrow space. I followed, keeping my head on a swivel as I adjusted myself and squeezed back into the tunnel. The rock closed in on us again, pressing against our backs, our chests. We moved quickly, retracing our steps through the dark, winding passage. Every inch felt tighter than before. The air seemed heavier. I could hear Ryan's boots scuffling against the walls, his breathing coming faster and harder. Then, the tight squeeze. The final passageway that led back to the outside. I dropped onto my stomach, stretching both arms forward and pulling myself into the tunnel. I focused on the light ahead, a small sliver of blue-grey at the end of the passage. It had to be just a few more feet. Behind me, Ryan grunted as he followed. The tunnel was just barely big enough for us to fit, pressing against our backs and ribs. We inched forward, dragging ourselves through the confined space. Then, I heard Ryan stop. A sharp, sudden inhale. "Dude." His voice sounded strained. I twisted my neck as best as I could, trying to look back. but couldn't. What? A beat of silence, then... My hand. It's completely numb. Something in my chest went cold. I couldn't see him, but I knew what he meant. We'd barely stopped to look at his injury after the attack, too focused on getting the hell out of there. But it must have been deeper than we thought. Maybe it had hit a nerve, and he hadn't felt it due to adrenaline. I heard Ryan shift behind me, trying to pull himself forward. I can't close my fingers. His flashlight flickered against the stone walls, making the shadows stretch and shift. Ryan tried again, dragging himself forward with one functioning hand. His movements sounded awkward, unsteady. He could still push with his legs, but with one hand out of commission, his pace slowed. The sound was closer now. I felt my lungs seize. Ryan must have heard it too, because his breath hitched, his flashlight jerking as he twisted his head back toward the sound. Ryan pushed forward, his boots scraping against the stone, his body jerking with effort. But without his hand to grip and pull, he wasn't moving fast enough. My heart hammered against my ribs. The sound was closer now. I could almost feel the air shifting behind me. I turned back toward the exit, toward the open air just a few feet ahead. Ryan grunted, desperate now, trying to shove himself forward. Then, for the first time, a breath. Low, wet, just inches behind us. The wheezing had stopped. Now, it was just breathing. Move, Ryan gasped. His voice was tight with fear. I'm going, I shouted back, shoving myself forward. My hands scrambled for purchase on the rock, fingers scraping against sharp edges. Ryan grunted, kicking hard as he tried to push himself forward. I could hear the strain in his voice, the way his body trembled against the stone. He was fighting, and then he gasped. Sharp, sudden. Then, nothing. Silence. A cold pit formed in my stomach. Ryan? Silence. No more grunting, just the faintest shift of air. I kicked wildly, thrashing my legs, shoving myself forward with every ounce of strength I had left. My knee banged against a piece of stone, but I didn't care. I had to move. I clawed at the rock, gasping, feeling my body scrape and cut through the last few inches of the tunnel. The exit was right there. One last push. I threw myself forward, and then I was out. I hit the ground hard, rolling onto my back. The night sky was above me, the trees swaying gently in the wind. Fresh air flooded my lungs, burning my throat. For a moment, I just lay there, dazed, disoriented by the sheer openness around me. I spun onto my hands and knees, scrambling back toward the hole, reaching inside. Ryan, come on. My fingers grasped an empty space. I swung my flashlight down, aiming it into the tunnel, expecting to see him just inches away, dragging himself toward the exit. I saw nothing, but I heard a noise so deeply wrong that my body rejected it before my brain could even process it. A wet, disgusting crunch. The sound of something tearing through muscle, splintering bone, a muffled, sickening chewing noise. I felt my stomach twist violently. I didn't need to see it. I knew. Another crunch, then a squelch. Ryan was gone. A low, grinding groan deep beneath the earth. The creature let out a scream from inside, and the entrance shook, as it sounded like it pounded its frame against the entrance. The ground beneath the entrance trembled. The stones we had pulled loose earlier shifted on their own, tumbling back into place. The cave was collapsing again. The hole we had worked for hours to dig through collapsed inward in a violent rush of stone and dust. I watched, stunned, as our entire entranceway disappeared. Within seconds, the hole was gone. Just solid rock. I dropped to my knees and started digging. I clawed at the dirt, heaving the loose stones aside, throwing them behind me. I could barely see through the dust, my fingers already scraped raw against the rough limestone. But no matter how much I pulled, pushed, dug, I couldn't even make a dent. I don't know how long I sat there before I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking, my mind still trying to grasp what I had just witnessed. I stared at the screen, at the emergency call option. What the hell was I supposed to say? I dialed. The operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth. My mind was blank, my throat clenched so tight I could barely force words through it. My friend, he's missing. We were in a cave and he's trapped. Sir, can you clarify? A cave collapsed. Is your friend trapped? I swallowed. Yes, it collapsed. Another silence, longer this time. Then, stay where you are. We're sending a unit out now. By the time the police arrived, I'd gone numb. The officers didn't believe me. Not really. But they saw the dirt on my clothes, the fresh scrape on my forehead where I must have clipped a rock on my way out. They knew I was distressed, panicked. They brought search dogs. More people came, more lights. The digging started. But they never found Ryan, never found anything. They questioned me for hours. Where did Ryan go? What exactly happened? How did I get out if he didn't? I told them the truth. They didn't write it down. Every first snowfall of the year, we ran. It wasn't a festival. We were running to survive. The date was never a mystery. They told us weeks in advance. It was printed on billboards, blasted on the news, scrolled across the bottom of television screens in red lettering. The first snowfall will arrive on November 12th. Prepare. People marked it on their calendars. We didn't question it anymore. The day before the snowfall, the entire town shut down. Schools closed early, businesses locked their doors. No deliveries, no flights, no traffic in or out. It was as if we were preparing for a storm. But the weather wasn't the problem. It was what came with it. Everyone had their own preparations. Some packed light bags, just enough to keep moving. Others mapped out faster routes, cutting through fields and back roads to avoid getting stuck. People checked their shoes, making sure their laces were tight, their soles weren't worn down. There was no ceremony, no speeches, no sirens, just an unspoken understanding. We waited. And then, when the first snowflake fell, we ran. I can still feel it, even now. The burn in my legs, the cold biting at my skin, the rhythmic pound of footsteps all around me. 1,000 bodies moving in perfect unison, breathless, desperate. There was no pushing or chaos. We didn't shove or trample. We moved like a flood, one after the other, single file. There was no greed or malice from society to be found. Everyone had one mission, the same goal. Because stopping meant you would be gone. My first real memory of the run is blurred by time, but some things never fade. The cold, the fear, my mother's hand crushing mine in a grip. I was 5 years old the first time I remember running, too young to understand why, old enough to know not to ask. We waited inside until the first flake fell. The moment it did, my mother wrenched open the front door and pulled me into the street. The entire town was already moving. A single file line of people, shoulders hunched, breath clouding in the cold, feet pounding against the pavement. It wasn't like running in gym class or playing tag with the neighborhood kids. There was no laughing, no stopping to catch your breath. You moved, or you didn't make it. I remember crying, tripping over my feet. My mother yanked me forward so hard, my arm nearly dislocated. She never yelled or scolded me, just squeezed my hand tighter and kept running. Behind us, someone screamed. I didn't look back. No one ever did. By the time I was old enough to ask why, I already knew the answer. What happens if you don't run? No one ever answered. They didn't need to. Every child knew the stories. The tales were as old as the town itself. We had no Krampus, no boogeymen, no ghost stories passed down to keep children from wandering too far into the woods. We had the wolf walkers, and we didn't tell their stories to scare people. We told them so people would live. Because people that were caught would die and disappear. And I know this for certain. Because my father was one of the ones who got caught. I don't remember much about him, just the smell of whiskey on his breath, the heavy thud of his boots as he staggered through the house. He was drunk the night the snow came. My mother had tried to sober him up, but he wouldn't listen. By the time the snow came, he was too slow. We had to run anyway. I still remember the sound of him calling after us, slurring my mother's name. His voice got smaller and smaller, swallowed by the sound of the wind, the endless stampede of footsteps. My mother never looked back, and we never saw him again. By the time I turned 9, running had become a part of life, just another routine in the changing of seasons. I no longer tripped over my own feet or begged my mother to slow down. I'd learned the rhythm, the pace that let you breathe just enough to keep going, but never enough to get comfortable. Comfort was dangerous. We knew that better than anything. That year, the first snow came late. The cold had already settled deep into the bones of the town, and when the flurries finally started to fall, it was like a held breath finally releasing. I remember feeling something new that night, a thing I'd never felt during these runs. Curiosity. I'd never seen what we were actually running from. Sure, I knew what they were called, and brief descriptions passed around the community. but I didn't know. We were told not to look back, so that night, I did. At first, I thought they were people, figures moving between the snowflakes just out of focus, men in thick, furred coats, their heads covered by wolf masks. But then I looked closer, and I saw their arms. Thin, rotting human arms, stretched too long, the skin peeling in places, revealing raw, darkened muscle. The hands dragged at their sides, fingers twitching. Their legs were bony, discolored, bent strangely at the joints, as if their bodies had forgotten how to be human. The heads were fully wolf, but wrong, too broad. The snouts cracked and split in places where they shouldn't be. Their mouths were packed with rows of teeth that didn't fit together properly, overlapping, twisted. And their eyes. Some were missing entirely, dark, hollow sockets leaking something black. Others were too white, too wide, reflecting light in an unnatural glow. They didn't run. Not really. They seemed to be one with the snow, more so phasing with the falling snow rather than actually moving. Their forms blurred with the snow, like they were being dragged forward by something unseen. They moved as fast as the snowfall. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a sob, or something, because one of them turned its head toward me. Its snout split open even further, and I saw something pulsing inside its throat, shifting, writhing, as if it was struggling to hold its shape. I turned forward and never looked back again. Years later, the snowfall was predicted weeks ago. November 17th. The warnings were everywhere once more. News tickers, radio broadcasts, printed on every storefront window. A reminder. A deadline. People were already preparing, packing light, mapping their routes, making sure they had the right shoes. I'd always done the same. Until this year. Until I realized my mother wouldn't be running with me. She'd been bedridden for months. Her body had withered beneath the weight of sickness. The strong woman who once pulled me through the streets, now barely able to lift her own hand. Her voice had turned small, brittle, like something that could be carried away with the wind. But even through the weakness, she still tried. She still begged me to go. "You can't save me," she whispered. "Run, please." I sat beside her, gripping her cold fingers. I'd packed my bag that morning out of habit, but I'd never slung it over my shoulder. Because for the first time in my life, I couldn't leave. I couldn't run without her. I couldn't leave her behind like that, not when she dragged me with her so many times. She saw it in my face. She knew, and she cried. "I won't leave you behind, Mom. I can't." Outside, the sky was turning grey. The temperature had dropped. Tomorrow, the first flake would fall. And for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be ready. The first flake fell at 5:46 p.m. I watched it drift down from the sky, weightless, delicate, beautiful if I didn't know what it meant. Then came the sound. A deep, rolling hum, like wind moving through a hollow place, but heavier, thicker. It wasn't wind. And then the city ran. The streets erupted into motion. Doors slammed open. People poured onto the sidewalks, sprinting into the fading light. A stampede. A flood of bodies moving in perfect rhythm. Breath steaming in the cold. No hesitation, no second thoughts. I turned to my mother. She was so small now, so light. She looked up at me from the bed, her eyes filling with something I couldn't name. I lifted her into my arms. She barely made a sound. Her body felt fragile, weightless, like she had already started slipping away. I stepped outside. The cold hit me like a wall. The wind sliced through me, sharp and unrelenting. Snowflakes swirled in chaotic patterns, dancing through the air, hiding the shapes of those running ahead. I took my first step, then another. Then I ran. It was different this time, harder. I wasn't running for myself. I was running for both of us. And it was my first taste of what my mother had gone through when I was a young child. My legs burned with every step, the weight in my arms slowing me down. Every breath was a gasp, sharp and ragged. Ahead, the crowd was already disappearing into the white. I tried to keep up, but behind me, I could hear them closing in. The change in the air, the way the cold thickened, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Just moving. A sound so smooth, it was almost soothing, like something gliding over the ice. Then came the other noises. A soft gnarling, and then the first scream from behind us. An elderly couple. I didn't stop, but my mother, weaker than she'd ever been, lifted her head just slightly and whispered, "They're here." Ahead, the last of the runners vanished into the snow. The line was gone. It was just me, my mother, and whatever was closing in behind us. The city had vanished behind me, swallowed by the storm. I could barely feel my feet anymore. My muscles were screaming, my arms ached from carrying my mother's weight. But I held on. I had to. The snow pounded against my skin, wind howling through the trees as I stumbled onto an old, barely visible path leading into the forest. I didn't know where it led. I didn't care. Slow, labored, rattling frostbitten lungs fighting for air. Too close, too close. I kept moving, but the snow was deepening. My boots sank into it with every step, making each movement harder, slower. I was losing. I rested, glanced at my mother. Her head rested limply against my chest, her breath coming in cold shivers. Her eyes opened halfway. Then she whispered, "Put me down." I shook my head, the words burning like a bullet from a gun. "No, you can't run with me. I won't leave you. You have to." Her voice was weak, but I could hear the desperation in it. I held her closer. No, not her. The gnarling grew ever louder. I could hear them now, moving through the snow. I looked behind to see how much distance stood between us and them. One of them stood closer than the others, smaller, perhaps younger. But it zeroed in on us. That much was clear. The snow bent around the thing like the world itself was trying to look away. I snapped my head back forward, then up ahead. A structure, barely visible through the whiteout, an old shed, broken and sagging, its wooden door hanging open. I pushed forward, forcing myself to move faster. The moment we crossed the threshold, I kicked the door shut with my boot and collapsed onto the wooden floor, clutching my mother to my chest. The cold was inside my bones now. I could barely feel my hands. My heart slammed against my ribs. The wind howled outside, the gnarling slowed. Then, silence. I pressed my hand over my mother's mouth, covering both of our breathing. I didn't know if the walls were enough, if they could see us right now, if they could smell us. But we had to stay quiet. The shed was falling apart. The wooden walls groaned with every gust of wind, the roof sagging under the weight of ice and time. It smelled of rot and damp wood, of something old and long forgotten. The only thing between us and them was a thin sheet of splintered timber. And they were right outside. I pressed my back against the wall, cradling my mother in my lap, my entire body trembling with exhaustion. She was barely conscious now. Her breathing was weak, her lips pale, her arms draped over me like a dead weight. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, faint, sluggish. She wouldn't last much longer, and neither would I. The whispers started slow. I never heard them before, never been close enough. At first, they sounded like the wind, but then the words took shape. Cold, weak, not fast enough. The voices shifted, changing in pitch, in rhythm, some too high, some too deep. And then, one of them spoke with my father's voice. You should have run. The door creaked. My breath caught in my throat. I barely moved, just my fingers tightening over my mother's wrist, as if holding onto her would keep us both anchored in place. Something was coming. I couldn't breathe, and beyond the doorway, through the swirling snow and shifting shadows, I saw it. It stood just outside, its massive shape barely visible through the storm. Not quite a man, not quite a wolf. The body was too long, too hunched. Its fur was wet, clumped, hanging off its frame like peeling skin. Its arms were wrong. Human hands, but stretched too thin, the skin splitting around the knuckles, revealing blackened veins pulsing beneath. It tilted its head toward the open door. It knew we were here. Then, suddenly, my mother grabbed my face. Her fingers pressed into my skin, tilting my head down, forcing me to look at her. I expected her to whisper, to tell me to run, to beg me one last time to leave her behind. But she didn't. She just smiled, soft, warm, like she wasn't afraid anymore. Then she moved. With the last of her strength, she pushed herself up onto trembling arms. Her entire body shook, her legs barely able to hold her weight. She stood. Not for long, but long enough. And then she screamed. The sound tore through the shed, loud and raw, echoing through the trees, cutting through the wind and the whispers. A cry of defiance. The creature turned toward her. It thought she was the only one there. I stayed frozen, cowering behind overturned furniture, my hands clenched over my own shaking body, unable to move. I wanted to reach for her, to grab her, to stop her. But I couldn't. I was too afraid. The last thing I saw of my mother was a silhouette in the doorway. Small, weak, but standing. She was gone. I woke up, clutching nothing. My hands were frozen into stiff, aching claws, still gripping the air where my mother had been. For a moment, my mind was stuck in the in-between, the space where I could still feel her weight in my arms, still hear the echo of her scream in my ears, still believe that when I opened my eyes, she would be there. But she wasn't. The storm had passed. I felt it before I saw it, the stillness, the silence that came after the first snowfall. No wind, no whispers, just the slow, aching crawl of sunlight through the cracks in the broken shed. I pushed myself up onto numb legs, my body sluggish, like it didn't belong to me anymore. The door stood wide open. The world outside was white and empty. I stepped out into the snow. The air was crisp, cold in a way that no longer burned, just settled into my skin like a layer of ice beneath the surface. The sky stretched above me, bright, endless blue. Nothing moved. I turned back toward the shed, half expecting to see something. Footprints, a trail, some sign of what had happened. But the snow was undisturbed. No footprints, no bodies, like no one had ever been here at all. I started walking. There was nothing else to do. The pressure in my chest weighed 1,000,000 tons. By the time I reached the edge of the city, I already knew what I would find. The people would be back in their homes, the streets would be clear, there would be no talk of those who didn't return, like they had never existed at all. I have run every year since that night, even when my legs burned, even when my lungs screamed for air, even when I wanted nothing more than to let the snow swallow me whole. I ran. I ran for my mother. And for years, I ran for others too. I reached out, pulled stragglers forward, gripped shaking hands, forced people to keep moving when their bodies were ready to give up. Some I saved, some I didn't. But I am old now. My body is not what it used to be. The years have stolen my strength, my speed. My breath is weak, my legs barely able to carry my own weight, much less someone else's. And the first snowfall is coming. The announcement came last week. It scrolled across the bottom of the television screen as I sat in my chair, hands resting in my lap, bones aching in the cold that never really leaves you after that long. November 23rd, first snowfall expected. It was not a warning, not for me. I lay in bed now, beneath blankets that do nothing to warm me. The night is quiet, still. I know what comes next. The air will shift, the first flake will fall, and the world will start to run without me. I turn my head toward the window, waiting. The glass is dark, a reflection of the room behind me. My own eyes stare back, hollow and sunken. Then, a shadow passes across the glass. Not fast, just moving. It stops, lingers as if waiting, and then a warmth settles over me, a presence I haven't felt in decades. I close my eyes, I smile, and I say nothing. It's strange how grief changes the way you see things. After my wife, Sarah, passed away, I couldn't stay in the city anymore. Too many reminders, corners and cafes haunted by memories I wasn't ready to face. People kept telling me Ellie was young enough to adapt, that kids are resilient, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't fully understand why Mommy wasn't coming home. Neither did I. So, we moved back to Alders Creek, the small town I'd grown up in, to live in the house my parents had left me before they passed. It was a quiet place, nestled on the edge of sprawling woods that stretched for miles. Sarah was never one for the countryside. That was part of the reason we never lived here ourselves, even though we had a house. Yet to me, it felt familiar, comforting in a distant, numb sort of way. I convinced myself the silence was what we needed, or at least room to pretend that everything wasn't falling apart. I hadn't been back here in nearly 20 years, but some things never change. Alders Creek was exactly as I remembered it. One main road, a diner, a grocery store, and clusters of houses scattered along the edge of the thick woodland. The townsfolk were kind, if a bit distant. They remembered me vaguely, the kid who'd left for college and never really looked back. They offered condolences about Sarah with sympathetic eyes and awkward smiles. I tried to keep conversations short. It was easier that way. Our new home was old, wooden, and filled with creaks and groans. But it was warm. Ellie ran through it the first day, exploring rooms and opening cabinets like it was some grand adventure. Seeing her excitement stirred something in me, a fragile kind of hope. Yet beneath that hope was persistent ache, a nagging emptiness that no amount of distance or quiet seemed to fill. By the end of the first week, Ellie started talking to herself. I brushed it off as normal kid stuff, a way of coping, creating a companion out of thin air when loneliness sets in. I had imaginary friends at her age too. But when I asked her who she was chatting with, she answered quickly. "Mr. Mapmaker," she told me, her voice cheerful yet serious. "He's nice, Daddy, really smart, but he's very particular about getting things right." I just smiled and nodded, glad she had found something to keep her mind busy. I had no idea how quickly Mr. Mapmaker would become so much more than just a comforting illusion. Over the next few weeks, Ellie didn't stop drawing. If anything, the maps became her obsession. Every evening, after dinner, she'd sit cross-legged at the coffee table, crayons spread out meticulously before her. I'd watch silently from the couch, pretending to read. But really, I was waiting, wondering what she'd sketch next. She'd hum softly to herself, lost in concentration, talking quietly as if someone were right beside her. "No, that's wrong," she'd mumble. Mr. Mapmaker says the lake is deeper. Here. Most of the maps were innocent, even sweet. She'd draw the layout of her new house or a rough sketch of her school. But they started changing. She began illustrating places I recognized from childhood, ones I hadn't visited since I was her age, places I hadn't thought about in decades. An abandoned hunting cabin at the edge of the woods, weathered and crumbling, its roof sagging. She drew it exactly how I remembered it, right down to the broken shutters and faded red paint peeling from the walls. The thing is, Ellie's maps were unmistakably the work of a child. Crude lines, uneven proportions, colours bleeding past the edges. Trees were spindly things, their trunks a scribbled mess of brown, and lakes were heavy smudges of blue wax, pressed so hard into the paper that it sometimes tore. She'd label things in big, looping letters. Cabin, scrawled messily beneath a red blob of crayon. Big tree, next to a shaky green blob. Then came the lake. A stagnant, moss-covered pond deep in the woods, so silent and still that kids in Alders Creek used to dare each other to toss rocks into it, convinced that disturbing the water would wake something beneath. Ellie drew it with eerie accuracy, the surface shaded darkly, her crayon pressing hard enough to tear the paper in places. The edges of the map were smudged with her fingerprints, as though she traced the points countless times before finally getting it perfect. It wasn't just unsettling because of the details. It was unsettling because Ellie had no way of knowing about these places. I hadn't spoken a single word about them since we moved here, hadn't even thought of them in decades. And yet, there they were, rendered clearly by my 6-year-old daughter. One evening, while Ellie worked silently, I noticed something else about the drawings. Hidden among the trees and buildings were tiny symbols, strange markings that resembled letters. When I asked Ellie what they meant, she only shrugged, not looking up from her work. Mr. Mapmaker says they're important, she replied softly, her eyes fixed on the paper. He says they help you find your way back. The implication unsettled me. Back to where, Ellie? I asked cautiously. She paused, still gripping the crayon tightly. She didn't look at me, but her voice lowered to a whisper. Back home, Daddy. A shiver crawled down my spine, sudden and cold. Our home was right here, in this creaky old house with its peeling paint and overgrown yard. But the certainty in Ellie's voice made my stomach twist. For the first time, I wondered if home meant something else entirely to her. I gently took the drawing from her hands. Ellie, sweetheart, why don't you draw something happier tonight? Maybe some flowers or your friends at school. She looked away for a second, then back at me, confused, as if I'd said something ridiculous. Mr. Mapmaker doesn't like those things, she replied softly, almost apologetically, as if explaining the obvious. He says we have to finish this one first. She turned back to her drawing, the tip of her crayon grinding into the paper again, the silence thick and heavy around us. And I watched the tiny hands move, as though guided. I focused on her movements, almost in a daze. I'd been staring so long that she had actually finished the map right in front of me. a crude crayon line leading through the woods to an old hunting cabin. Then she started writing letters above the cabin. And that's when I snapped out of it and cursed myself under my breath for bothering her for just drawing. The morning I decided to follow Ellie's map started shortly after. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring down at the worn, folded paper on the counter Ellie had just finished the day prior. The hunting cabin, the spot she labelled in neat, childish handwriting. Where Mommy lives now. I laughed when I first read it, but that laughter had quickly faded, leaving behind an ache in my chest that hadn't dulled since losing Sarah. Ellie had seemed so serious when she handed it to me the night before. She looked up at me, eyes earnest, hopeful even. "Mr. Mapmaker said you need to see it, Daddy. He says it's important." And now, standing alone, coffee grown cold in my mug, I felt something settle in my gut. The rational part of me, the responsible adult, the grieving husband who'd buried Sarah, wanted to throw the map away and scold my child for this. Maybe she'd overheard neighbours talking. Maybe she'd seen a picture somewhere in my parents' photo albums. But something darker, quieter, tugged at me. A whisper that had been growing louder ever since Ellie handed me the map. What if it's real? Of course, I had no reason to believe so. But anyone who had ever lost anyone as suddenly as I did would know that you would hold onto any inkling of hope like a lifeline, no matter how otherworldly it seemed to other people. I dropped Ellie at her aunt's house, barely registering the small talk exchanged in the doorway. My mind was already deep in those woods, following those strange, childish directions. I had to be losing it. Ellie was just imaginative, copying details she'd overheard, piecing together half-remembered fragments of conversations she wasn't meant to hear. It had to be. It took me nearly an hour of trudging through mud and bramble before the cabin appeared, exactly as she'd drawn it. An old structure, sagging and consumed by moss, half hidden by twisted, skeletal trees. The air was thick, heavy with a smell of mold and earth. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. Shadows swallowed me, broken only by slivers of daylight filtering through cracked walls. I could barely breathe, not from the air, but from the weight of memory. Childhood fears long dismissed, stories whispered between classmates of dark figures and missing people. I almost turned back then, until I saw something glinting on the floor, catching the sparse, dirty sunlight. I crouched, breath hitching painfully in my chest as my fingers curled around it. A silver bracelet, small and delicate, decorated with tiny emeralds. Her bracelet. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. It couldn't be here. I'd chosen it myself for a birthday, buried with her when I'd said my last goodbye. It couldn't be here. But it was. I stumbled out of the cabin, the bracelet clenched tight in my fist, heart thundering in my ears. When I finally reached the car, I sat there shaking for what felt like hours, staring down at the silver chain coiled in my palm, her memory wrapped tightly around me. By the time I made it back home, Ellie was in bed, but I couldn't wait. I knelt beside her, my voice breaking as I held up the bracelet. Ellie, sweetheart. How did you know about this? She opened her eyes slowly, sleepily, like she'd been expecting me. Mr. Mapmaker told me, she said, yawning softly. He knows a lot of things. Did he tell you where he found it? I whispered, afraid of her answer, yet desperate for it. Her eyes drifted closed, her voice fading into a sleepy whisper. Mr. Mapmaker says Mummy gave it to him. He said it means you're on the right path. I sat there beside her bed, bracelet clenched tightly, heart hammering painfully in my chest. The right path. I didn't even know where I was going, but something told me it was already too late to turn back. After the bracelet incident, I couldn't pretend it was all coincidence anymore. Something was wrong, something bigger than Ellie, bigger than me. I needed answers, but finding them was harder than I expected. I went to see Mr. Gentry, the owner of the local hardware store. I stopped in under the pretense of needing gardening supplies, lingering until we were alone. As casually as I could, I mentioned the woods behind my property. The friendly smile he'd worn when I walked in vanished instantly, replaced with a careful blankness. His hands pausing over a row of rusty gardening shears. What about 'em? He asked, voice cautious, as if I just touched on something off limits. Just curious. My daughter, she's been exploring around here lately. Says she's found some interesting places. His eyes flickered away, voice strained. Kids have good imaginations. It's more than that, I pressed. She drew maps, detailed maps. He set down the shears heavily, still not meeting my gaze. You keep her close. That's not a place kids should be wandering. He hesitated, his voice quieter, burdened. And you shouldn't be poking around either. Before I could ask why, another customer entered, and the conversation ended abruptly. I kept trying, approaching others. The old woman at the grocery, Mr. Cooper down at the diner. But every time I mentioned the woods, I hit a wall of discomfort. Polite smiles would tighten, friendly chatter turning stiff and strained, and conversation quickly ended. No matter who I asked, I got the same warning disguised as advice. Stay out of the woods. The worst was Mrs. Callahan, who lived at the end of my street. She was ancient, even when I was a kid, and time hadn't made her any less sharp or perceptive. The afternoon sun was waning when I found her tending her rose garden, hands shaking slightly as she pruned dead leaves. Mrs. Callahan, I called out, trying to sound casual, friendly. She paused, eyes narrowing behind her thick lenses, scrutinizing me closely. I swallowed, pushing through my discomfort. Can I ask you something? She nodded slowly, eyes sharp. Ask, Benjamin. The woods, the ones behind... Her eyes narrowed, cutting me off before I could finish. Her voice was stern and quiet, carrying a deep warning. Some questions are better left unanswered. Please, I whispered, desperation leaking through my careful composure. My daughter's drawn maps, things she couldn't know. Something's wrong. Something is... Not something, Benjamin. Someone. She took a careful step toward me, lowering her voice further. There's always something in those woods, always has been, long before you and long after. It'll still be there. It finds ways of speaking, but the real danger, the real horror, is what it promises. She turned away sharply, pulling the door shut behind her, ending our conversation with a heavy finality. The silence left in a wake pressed in on me, deeper than before, as though the air itself had gone still. That night, I locked every window, bolted the back door, and double-checked every latch and lock in the house. I sat awake in the dark for hours, listening carefully, heart pounding at every rustle of wind and every distant snap of a branch. Ellie slept peacefully down the hall, unaware of the darkness that had taken root around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the woods I had to worry about. Whatever I'd uncovered in my quest for answers was woven deeply into the heart of this town, an unspoken terror they'd grown up learning to ignore. The woods weren't just forbidden, they were feared. From then on, Ellie wasn't allowed outside without me. The forest loomed at the edge of our property like a silent predator, patient and hungry. No matter how hard I watched Ellie, though, the dread remained, creeping slowly into my chest like rot in old wood. It wasn't enough. Whatever had gripped Ellie was not letting go, despite her no longer going outside. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Whatever was reaching out to Ellie, whatever was calling itself Mr. Mapmaker, had embedded itself too deeply. I had to get her out, had to get us away from that cursed forest before it swallowed us whole. Ellie fought the idea immediately, so unlike her usual gentle demeanor that it took me by surprise. She kicked and screamed as I carried her to the car, crying out that Mr. Mapmaker wouldn't let us leave, that we couldn't just abandon Mommy. Her words clawed at me, but I gritted my teeth, determined. It was time to put distance between Ellie and whatever darkness had been whispering in her ear. That night, as I packed our bags in tense silence, Ellie finally stopped pleading. She sat quietly in the corner of her room, drawing furiously, her tiny hand gripping the crayon with unsettling force. I didn't dare interrupt her, afraid I'd trigger another meltdown. At least she was calm. At least she was safe. Or so I thought. Sometime after midnight, I woke abruptly, my heart hammering in the silence. Something immediately felt wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, so I looked around. The hallway looked just the same as it always had, but it took a moment longer to realize what was wrong. Ellie's bedroom door, usually kept cracked open, was wide open, and the hallway beyond utterly still. I moved quietly, trying to remain calm as I stepped into her empty room, stomach tightening painfully when I saw the note resting on her pillow. It was another map, far more precise than the others, drawn hastily in the dark strokes of charcoal. The label read simply, "Mommy is waiting." My breath caught, heart lurching with fear. My daughter was gone. I sprinted out the front door into the suffocating blackness of the forest, screaming Ellie's name until my throat burned. twigs and branches tore at my skin, cutting my face and arms as I crashed blindly through the darkness. Nothing made sense anymore. Trees twisted grotesquely around me, paths doubled back impossibly, landmarks shifted into alien shapes exactly like the twisted images Ellie had drawn. Every step felt wrong, unnatural, as if the forest itself was reshaping around me, leading me deeper, guiding me into its heart. Then, finally, the trees opened into a clearing I'd never seen before. Moonlight bathed the clearing in pale, ghostly white, but there were no shadows, only stark emptiness, like the light itself feared to touch whatever stood in the center. Ellie was there, perfectly still. Her face was serene, empty of emotion, eyes staring blankly ahead. And beside her, standing what must have been at least 10 feet tall, its form shifting like smoke and ink, was who I assumed to be Mr. Mapmaker. The being Ellie had innocently named and trusted, the monster who twisted her grief into something dark and dangerous. My fists clenched, rage and helplessness swelling in my chest. "Let her go," I demanded, my voice shaking. "Please, she's just a little girl." Ellie turned her head slowly, mechanically, and smiled a hollow, distant smile. "Mummy says we can all be together again," she whispered. Her voice was soft, gentle, but utterly devoid of humanity. It was a mouth speaking, but the words belonged to someone or something else. The figure beside her shifted, its shape rippling and unstable, as if fighting to maintain its form. When it spoke, its voice crawled from every direction, seeping from the earth, the trees, the very sky itself. It vibrated through my bones, settling deep into my marrow. "You've come far," it murmured, the sound a twisted mockery of human comfort. "You deserve a reward." "I don't want a reward," I spat back. "Just give me my daughter." "You misunderstand," the mapmaker said gently, almost sorrowfully. "Everything has a price. To leave with her, you must leave something behind." My breath caught in my throat, heart thundering in my chest. I understood immediately. It wasn't asking for something trivial, not a keepsake or a memory. It wanted something deeper, something fundamental, a trade, an exchange. I didn't stop to think. I couldn't afford to. Instinct seized me, overpowering every hesitation, every shred of fear. I lunged forward, wrapped my arms around Ellie, and yanked her away from the towering silhouette of Mr. Mapmaker. The shadowy figure unleashed an enraged, whispering hiss, 1,000 voices slithering into my ears, sharp and venomous. But I didn't listen. I turned, Ellie tight in my grasp, and I ran. Trees twisted inward, clawing branches tore at our clothes and skin, and the very earth beneath our feet buckled, as though desperate to hold us there, to trap us forever. The air filled with screams, raw, tortured voices that ripped through my skull, begging, pleading, commanding us to stop. Ellie's small body went limp in my arms, her head bouncing weakly against my shoulder with every frantic step. Terror rose like bile in my throat, nearly choking me. But I couldn't slow down, couldn't falter, not even for a second. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed in agony, but I kept pushing forward, stumbling blindly through the endless maze of woods, desperately seeking some semblance of familiarity. I could feel the mapmaker behind us, a presence of icy, endless hunger closing the distance, furious of being robbed of its prize. It whispered harshly, angrily, promising suffering, promising that we would never escape. But I refused to let its poison seep into my heart. With a final burst of strength, I barreled through a wall of dense branches. Pain exploded across my face and arms, but suddenly, blessedly, I broke free. I stumbled forward onto familiar ground, tripping over the garden stones at the edge of our backyard. We collapsed together into the damp grass, bloodied, bruised, but alive. The oppressive silence was almost unbearable. The woods behind us were quiet now, as if they'd given up their pursuit, at least for the moment. For several heartbeats, I lay there, chest heaving, gasping for air, just holding Ellie, savouring the fragile illusion of safety. Then I realised Ellie wasn't moving. My stomach twisted violently as I rolled her over, gently brushing her tangled hair away from her face. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale and cold. I shook her gently at first, then with growing panic, desperation tightening my voice. Ellie? Ellie, wake up. Baby, please, wake up. I felt sick. Every horrible possibility crashing through my mind at once. Tears blurred my vision, heart hammering painfully in my chest. Then mercifully, her eyes fluttered open, staring blankly toward the night sky. Relief flooded me, powerful enough to make me dizzy. But the feeling was short-lived. Ellie's gaze wandered aimlessly, unfocused, confused. When she finally turned to me, her eyes were empty, like she was seeing me for the very first time. Who? She whispered weakly, voice trembling and uncertain. Who are you? My blood turned to ice. Ellie, it's Daddy, I stammered, trying desperately to keep my voice calm, gentle. It's me, sweetheart. You're safe now. She pulled back slightly, her eyes flickering fearfully, clearly frightened. No memory of the bond we'd shared since the moment she'd been born. My daughter, the reason for every struggle, every pain I endured, looked at me. I clutched her tightly, my shoulders shaking silently, unable to even cry. The house felt painfully empty as the terrible realization sunk in. I'd saved Ellie's life, but somehow I'd still lost her. The weeks passed. Ellie healed physically, cuts faded, bruises yellowed and vanished. But something fundamental inside her never came back. Each morning, I woke to a house that was both painfully familiar and unbearably foreign. Ellie moved through the same routines, ate breakfast in the same chair, slept in the same bed. But the little girl who had once filled these rooms with laughter and curiosity was no longer there. The doctors had an easy answer, neatly packaged as severe dissociative trauma. Losing a parent was a blow that could fracture any child's world, they said. But they hadn't been there. They hadn't watched the shadow-formed monstrosity whisper impossible things. they hadn't felt reality itself bend around them. Ellie's memories weren't buried under layers of grief. They'd been torn away, ripped from her as payment to something older and far crueler than mere loss. We lived in strained silence. Ellie no longer mentioned Mr. Mapmaker, and she stopped drawing maps altogether, as if that obsession had never existed. But she also stopped calling me Dad. My name felt strange on her lips, polite, distant, like she was addressing someone else's father, like I was no longer part of her story. I tried to bridge the gap. Little gestures, reminders, favourite meals, and bedtime stories we'd read 100 times. But her response was always the same. A polite, confused smile, as if humorously tolerating the well-meaning stranger who kept trying too hard. The house was quieter than ever before, the silence heavy enough to suffocate. But it was preferable to the alternative, the whispers that lingered at the edge of my dreams, voices echoing softly through the hallways, mocking my choice, reminding me of what I'd sacrificed. Whatever I'd done that night, whatever I'd given away, was the cost. Ellie was here, safe, physically unharmed, but I had not brought my daughter home. I had simply traded one horror for another, a monkey paw's wish. So, every night when I'm alone, I sit in my office and draw maps. I started with random doodles, with no real inspiration. But slowly, they're becoming more and more cohesive. I scribble things without thinking, yet they seem to make some kind of sense. I have not seen Mr. Mapmaker, yet sometimes I feel him guiding my hand in strange ways. Soon, I'll have a guide to follow, to lead me back to the spot in the forest where Mr. Mapmaker makes his trades. I'm going to get Ellie back. I just don't know what it will truly cost. We hacked our way through the jungle like we were peeling back time itself. Every branch and root we cut and stepped over felt like it hadn't been touched in decades, maybe longer. The heat pressed down on us, wet and constant, and the insects came in waves that never seemed to stop. Somewhere overhead, monkeys shrieked and fell silent just as quickly. That silence always made me pause. None of us spoke much. The machetes did the talking, slicing rhythmically as we followed the barely visible trail Lewis swore existed. I didn't see it, but he moved with a confidence, false or not, we didn't have better options. Around midday, we reached the clearing. Or, more like the jungle gave up for a second. In the middle was a rise of uneven stone, half swallowed up by moss and earth. It could have passed for a hill, if not for the exposed edge of something unmistakably artificial. Weathered concrete and the rusted corner of a metal structure poking out like a broken rib. No one said anything right away. Then from behind me, a voice muttered, low and breathless, "There it is." We moved closer, brushing back the foliage. The moss came off in heavy sheets. Underneath, a swastika, barely visible, faint from time and grime, was stamped into the concrete, half melted from what looked like an old fire. None of us reached out to touch it. "Jeez," someone whispered. We'd found it. The bunker wasn't a myth. It was real, and it was here. Lewis stepped forward and ran his hand along the edge of the old hatch embedded in the slope, tracing the rusted wheel lock. He pulled gently, and it groaned like something waking up. The door was ajar, only slightly, but enough that the smell hit us almost immediately. Old oil, mold, metal, and beneath it all, something else, sweet and rotting. Ventilation shaft might be clogged, I offered with a chuckle. A flashlight clicked on beside me. No words, just a beam of light piercing down into a dark mouth cut into the earth. None of us said it out loud, but we knew. We were going in. The ladder was slick with condensation and rust. I climbed slowly, each rung groaning under the weight, until my boots hit the concrete floor with a dull, wet thud. The air down there wasn't just stale. It had an artificial weight to it. No power. That much was immediately clear and expected. The ceiling fixtures overhead were shattered, wiring frayed and exposed like vines, brittle and dead. The corridor stretched out ahead of us in both directions. Jonas stepped past me first, hand brushing the wall as we moved. Concrete still solid, he muttered. Reinforced. This wasn't some half-baked shelter. We passed a rusted plaque, the German text barely legible. Sector 1, Unterkunft, quarters. The rooms were narrow, lined on either side of the hall like cells. Inside, rows of metal bed frames stripped of sheets. What remained of the mattresses had slumped into soft mounds of black. Mushrooms had taken root in one. Another had the impression of a body long gone, just the shape, still there in the stained foam like a fossilized absence. Someone opened a crate near the far wall. Dust plumed out. Food rations, Jonas said, still sealed. Sasha lifted one and turned it over. They labelled everything by name, date, role, caloric requirement. She pointed to the faded ink. Jane Nuslane, 3,000 calories, night watch. All so precise, but the silence in those quarters told another story. Further in, we found a hallway bulletin board. A photo was still tacked up, barely hanging on. 4 men, all in uniform. German officers, at least from what I could tell, standing in a cramped hallway right here in the bunker. Their faces were long and drawn, eyes sunk deep. One of them was holding a small child. "That's not wartime Germany," Sasha whispered behind me. "That's after they arrived here." The hallway ended in a bulkhead door, half of its hinges, rusted and bent inward, like something had forced its way through years ago. We ducked inside and found the largest room yet. Storage maybe, though half the shelving had collapsed and a fine film of mold coated the floor. Amid the wreckage was a scorched binder. Jonas flipped it open gently, and half of it crumbled in his hands. "Manifest," he said, eyes narrowing. "Look at this." Typed names in columns, serial numbers, dates of birth, occupation. 978 entries. Men, women, children. Sasha leaned over his shoulder, lips moving silently as she scanned. They listed them all: nurses, engineers, even barbers. No ranks? I asked. She shook her head. Only functions. They were building a self-contained population. In the far corner, we found the radio room, or what was left of it. Shattered glass and twisted knobs lay scattered across the floor like shrapnel. An old broadcasting mic hung from its wire, swinging slightly in the humid draft. Banks of analog equipment were ripped open, fuses missing, wires yanked out in clumps. Dr. Kettley crouched down next to one unit and muttered, "This was military grade, state of the art for the time." "Sabotage?" I asked. He didn't answer, but the way he stood up told me everything. We lingered in the radio room longer than we should have. No one said it, but something about the broken equipment unsettled us in a different way. Not just because it was destroyed, but because it had been intentional, as if someone had wanted to make sure no word ever left this place again. We moved on. Sasha suggested we start marking rooms as we went. Chalk lines, basic numbering. Smart idea. It helped, gave the illusion of control. Past the supply wing, we found a heavy door partially ajar with a tarnished brass plate above the frame. Officer Unterkunft. Officers' quarters. The air inside was different, still. Dust floated in the beams of my headlamp like falling snow, untouched for decades. Jonas moved toward the desk, opened a drawer. Empty. Another. Paper scraps. A yellowed photograph of someone blurred and smiling. Nothing useful. Sasha knelt beside the trunk. "Help me with this." I unclasped the rusted latch and helped to lift the lid. Inside, a wool officer's coat folded. Beneath it, something wrapped tightly in a stiff brown cloth, tied with a leather strap that cracked as she unwrapped it. A journal. The leather was dark, almost black with age, but still intact. A rusted iron clasp held it shut. Sasha took a breath. "This might be useful." She worked the clasp loose. It took effort. It hadn't been opened in years. A sharp, metallic snap, then a shudder as the leather flexed. She peeled it open carefully, revealing thick, yellowed pages covered in tight, immaculate writing. And on the inside cover, scrawled in deliberate, blocky script, "I am Eric Mahler, engineer. If these pages are found, know that we are not all willing." We exchanged glances. For a long second, no one said anything. Then Sasha turned the page, and we began to read. May 12th, 1945. I have arrived in South America at last. The journey was as surreal as it was harrowing. After months of uncertain passage by submarine and stolen aircraft, we landed on foreign soil with a promise of salvation. The promise was whispered with fervour by those who orchestrated our passage, a promise of a new beginning away from the ruins of a lost war. Dozens more arrived in the weeks that followed, scientists with eyes bright from hope and despair, soldiers whose uniforms were as stained with honour as with regret, families clinging to the belief that they too might start over. We were all immigrants of circumstance, united by the lie of salvation. In time, we began the construction of something vast, an underground complex that stretched out beneath the unforgiving jungle. We laboured our hands and backs, broken by ceaseless work. Slave labor, both forced and self-imposed, carried bricks and mixed mortar in the dim light of torches. The complex was designed to be our haven. One day, we would shelter as many as 1,000 souls. Already, the numbers grow, and each new arrival reinforces our resolve, though a gnawing doubt stirs at the edge of my mind. June 3rd, 1945. The days have grown colder, though the jungle remains unyielding in its humid embrace. Communications with Germany have all but ceased. At first, the higher-ups maintained that the war raged on, a justification to seal us inside this very bunker. But now, with every passing day, I find my certainty waver. The radios have fallen silent, and the orders we once received from afar are nothing but echoes of a past that no longer exists. Inside these walls, the leadership insists we remain sealed in. They assure us that outside, chaos reigns, that our isolation is the only means to preserve the future. Yet I wonder, if the war has truly ended, why must we be locked away? In the dim corridors, I hear the soft laughter of children, a sound both haunting and tender. New life has been born here. In the dark recesses of this underground world, they grow up knowing nothing of sunlight, their only lullaby the hum of machinery and the distant groans of the bunker. I cannot shake the feeling that we are no longer the architects of our fate, but rather subjects in a grand experiment. The silence from the outside grows ever more oppressive, and with each passing day, the control exerted by those at the helm tightens like a noose. I fear what might come next, and I write these words in the hope that they may serve as a warning should anyone ever find them. September 14th, 1946. I've not written in some time. The work has consumed us all, but it is not construction that keeps our hands busy now. It is research. Though I am an engineer by trade, I am often called to assist with logistics and infrastructure in Section 3, the medical wing. It is there that the whispers began. They called it Project Morgenmensch, the Man of Tomorrow Project. A rebirth, they say. A better human, a stronger one who will be ready when the right rises again, if not in this lifetime, then the next. I've seen the files. The injections are not just vitamin serums or nutritional supplements as they claim in official meetings. There are compounds I do not recognize, radiation-laced fluids, growth accelerants, even samples rumored to be derived from fungi found deep within the jungle. Some subjects are brought in at night, barely conscious. Others are volunteers, selected with honors. But none of them return to the dormitories. A man named Dieter, a chemical assistant from Sector 2, questioned the project openly last week. He was gone by morning. We were told he had requested a reassignment to an external outpost. I don't believe that outpost exists. 3 nights ago, while checking airflow systems, I paused near the ventilation shafts above the lower levels. I heard something. A scream, not of pain, but of pure confusion. It was drawn out and hollow, like someone was trying to scream while underwater. Then came the thud, something slamming against the ductwork. Once, twice. They sounded like heavy slaps. I have stopped asking questions, but I haven't stopped writing them down. February 7th, 1947. We were lied to. There is no Reich. There is no war. There is no Germany waiting to be reborn. One of the young technicians in communications, Rudolph, barely 20, smuggled in a radio from the surface during a supply rotation. A homemade receiver tuned to civilian frequencies. He played a broadcast for us, clear as a bell. A station out of Santiago, Chile. A full broadcast in Spanish, music, advertisements, and politics. We lost, long ago. The higher-ups knew. They have known this entire time. All of it, the isolation, the lockdowns, the rationing, the indoctrination, was to keep us here, to maintain a closed system, a laboratory, not a refuge. When the truth spread, there was panic, yelling in corridors, officers pulling sidearms. Rudolph was taken, so were the 3 others who heard the broadcast directly. They said it was a security breach, that outside voices are contaminated. A few of us discussed mutiny, quietly, in passing. It lasted 2 days before someone betrayed us. I was beaten. Not enough to kill, just enough to remind. One man was dragged to Sector 3. No one has seen him since. I believe now that we are no longer survivors. Rather, we are subjects. October 23rd, 1947. It is happening too fast now. I can hardly keep track of the days. Sickness is everywhere. Not just fatigue or malnutrition, but something deeper. Flesh turns soft, almost sponge-like. Eyes glaze over. Some have developed a sort of fever that doesn't burn the skin, but warps the mind. Men forget how to walk, women scream at nothing, and children are crying. The experiments have escaped containment. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows. It began with a breach in Sector 3, a door left open, a containment cell damaged. The lights went out for less than 2 minutes. But it was enough. They don't resemble people anymore. One moved through the upper maintenance corridor last night. I didn't see it fully. It moved in a sluggish pace. I heard gasps, then nothing. When I returned with 2 others, there was no blood, just clothing. 3 men gone, with no sign of struggle, only the scent of salt and bile in the air. Today, I opened a sealed supply crate in the communal hall. Inside were plastic-wrapped packages. I read the labels: coded, sterile, clinical. Protein units processed. But it was warm. I took a knife and cut one open. They were feeding us the failures. Some knew, some didn't. But we ate anyway. We had no choice. I vomited until nothing came out but bile. I have not eaten since. November 9th, 1947. This will be my final entry. There is no more order here, only rituals, grotesque imitations of structure. Men still wear uniforms. They march the halls as if the Reich still listens, as if this place is anything but a grave. I was part of a small group who tried to escape. There was an auxiliary hatch built during the early days, before the lockdowns. We found it behind the water reserves, hidden under rebar and rotting crates. 6 of us planned to leave. We never made it out together. Something followed us, a failed subject, if you can even call them that. I saw its face for the first time. A man I once knew. Fisher, I think. His skin had melted like wax and reformed in sagging layers. His jaw was unhinged, his ribs pulsed like gills. He moved without urgency, like a predator that knows nothing can escape. He crushed Jurgen against the wall with one arm. I saw bones snap through his thigh like dry kindling. Hannah screamed until her voice gave out, then tried to run and slipped on the floor on what remained of someone else. We sealed the hatch behind us, but I was injured. My leg is broken. I can't walk. I volunteered to stay. The others are gone now, up that ladder and back into a world that might not even be waiting for them. Maybe they'll make it back. Maybe not. I no longer care. This journal will remain with me. If you are reading this, you must understand. We were not all complicit. We were not all monsters. We didn't speak right away after the journal ended. Sasha closed it with both hands, slowly, like it might shatter. She sat back on her heels, mouth slightly open in a stunned silence. Jonas had been pacing in a tight loop near the bed. Dr. Ketley hadn't moved at all. He stood by the desk, arms folded, staring at the floor like it owed him an answer. I couldn't think, couldn't find a thread to hold on to. The words were still echoing. Then Ketley spoke. "We can't stop here." I looked at him. "What are you talking about?" He turned toward us, slow and heavy. "This journal it's only a part of the picture. If half of what he described actually happened down there, we owe it to history to see the rest. There could be evidence, proof, biological remnants." "You want to find them?" Sasha asked. Her voice was hoarse. "The things he described?" "I want to know if they're even real," he said. Jonas nodded, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "He's right. We're already in. We can't just run now." "Jonas, we should run," Sasha said, rising to her feet. "This isn't a science project. This is a mass grave built on a lie. There's a reason they sealed it up." She looked at me, eyes raw. "Tell me you don't want to keep going." I didn't answer. The air was changing, heavier, close to sour. I hadn't noticed until then, but it was there, clinging to my clothes. Footsteps behind us. We turned to see Lewis duck into the room. His face was pale, a thin sheen of sweat catching the light from his headlamp. He looked at each of us, then down at the journal in Sasha's hands. "I read a few more pages," he said. "I didn't want to, but I did." He swallowed hard. "There's something wrong down here, and I don't want to be a part of it." "We're going down," Jonas said. Lewis stared at him, then turned to me. "Don't go with them." I didn't answer. A minute later, he was gone. The air felt colder once he left. The stairs to the lower level had nearly rusted through, but the structure held. We descended one at a time, our boots clanging softly against the metal, echoing up the shaft. My headlamp flickered once and stabilized. The damage was obvious from the start. The walls were warped and bulging in place, like something had pressed from the other side with slow pressure. Entire panels were cracked open, revealing tangled veins of rusted piping and torn cables. One segment of the ceiling had collapsed inward. We ducked beneath it, crawling through to reach the next corridor. As we moved farther down the corridor, the signs of collapse became less like age and more like a struggle. The walls were scarred with impact marks, some shallow, some punched in deep. Sasha brushed a hand across a jagged hole near a doorway. Her fingers came away flaked with rust, and something darker beneath it. "Bullet holes," Dr. Kedley said quietly. "Close range." We looked around, and they were everywhere. Pockmarked across the hallway, clustered around corners near doorways. Some had fragments of brass casings still embedded in the cracks between the floor tiles. Others were surrounded by long dried splashes of what could only be blood. Someone, maybe many, had tried to fight whatever got out. The rooms on this level had no beds, just rusted restraints, shelves of ruined medical equipment. Dr. Ketley stepped ahead, his lamp tracing an open door. He froze. I turned to ask what he saw, but before I could speak, I heard it. Breathing. Wet, strained, like air pushed through mucus and ruined lungs. Then something shifted in the dark. A shape moved at the edge of our light. Gurgling followed, long and low. I felt the breath leave my body as something inside me screamed to run. It was hunched in the corner, facing away from us. A towering shape with limbs bent at wrong angles and skin stretched too far to hold what was inside. It was the shape of a man, barely. Its skin was wet and sagging, shiny with dark sweat or fluid, parts of it clinging to the bone, other parts slowing off in folds. Where its joints met, elbows, knees, shoulders, black fluid oozed freely and pooled on the floor in thick, tar-like globs. It was wearing something, or what remained of something. A uniform, torn, threadbare, stretched until the fabric had embedded itself into flesh. The buttons were still there, the collar fused to its body. One bare foot dragged behind it, grotesquely swollen and raw, the heel split open like old fruit. The other foot thudded when it moved, heavy and wet. And its face. No, it wasn't a face. A mound of pale pulp, sagging and twitching, with holes where features should have been. No eyes, just dark impressions like the sockets had collapsed inward long ago. Then it sniffed. A wet, rattling inhale that sounded like fluid bubbling in a drain pipe, and it turned toward us. Its mouth opened wide. It released a groan, slow and shuddering, like a child. The sound echoed off the walls, wet and heavy, and it slapped the wall with one massive hand, leaving a smear of black. Dr. Ketley whispered something I couldn't hear. His light dropped slightly, his hands trembled. The thing stepped forward. We ran. The hallway behind us felt longer than before. Our boots hit the floor with a frantic pace, lights bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind us came the sound of meat hitting concrete, a sound that wasn't quite footsteps, but not quite crawling either. Dr. Ketley tripped near a broken section of piping. I turned too late. The thing reached him in a blink. One bloated hand wrapped around his waist and lifted him like a doll. Ketley's scream tore through the hallway. Then a crack. We kept running. Jonas was ahead of me, nearly at the bulkhead we'd come through when it happened. Jonas reached the doorway. He turned to seal it, tried to pull the reinforced door shut. The creature's arm whipped around the corner like it was liquid. A tendril slid into Jonas's mouth, fast. His body arced violently, feet lifting off the ground as he convulsed. His eyes went wide, then rolled back. His limbs flailed once, twice, then stopped. He collapsed, twitching once before going completely still. The thing retracted its arms slowly. I backed away and realized I was the only one left. I kept to the left wall, then the right, mentally tracing every turn we took on the way down. My chest burned, my legs wanted to give, but something beneath it all, instinct, kept me upright. And then I saw the hatch we came from. Relief hit like a punch to the gut, so sharp it made me stagger. I climbed up the ladder and grabbed the iron wheel, turned it. Nothing. It didn't budge. I tried again, planted my feet, pulled harder. The bolts groaned faintly, but it didn't give. I felt along the edges. There were no breaks, no external damage, no collapse. The mechanism hadn't failed. It had been sealed from the other side. Lewis. He must have heard something from the outside, or panicked, or maybe he closed it wrong on accident. My fists hit the hatch again and again, pain booming across my knuckles. I yelled, screamed his name. No response. Behind me, moisture. The faintest vibration underfoot, followed by the moan. I shut off my light, backed into the dark. The crawl space I'd found was barely wide enough to fit through. An old maintenance shaft lined with torn conduit and brittle cables. I didn't think about what might be in it. I just dropped to my knees and slid inside, scraping my ribs against the stone, arms shaking as I pulled myself deeper. I stopped, maybe 15 feet in, tucked between two collapsed pipe junctions, curled as tightly as I could. My chest rose and fell so fast, I was afraid the sound of my breathing would give me away. I clamped my hand over my mouth and waited. The thing came into view slowly. Just light at first, bouncing dimly from a lamp still lying in the hallway behind me. Then the sound. There was a strip of fabric, barely holding to the remains of a coat or uniform. A piece of cloth fused into the rotten flesh of the creature's chest, barely hanging on. A name tag. Marla. The lettering was faded but clear enough. Eric Marla. It paused near the hatch. I couldn't see it clearly anymore, but I could hear it. It slapped the walls, sniffed the air loud, gurgling inhales like a drowning animal struggling to taste something lost. Then it began to speak. Not full words, but it tried anyway. Ruhe, mein Komm. I squeezed my eyes shut and held my breath. I don't know how long I stayed in that crawl space. My joints had gone stiff, my mouth dry as bone. My flashlight had long since died, and even the fear was beginning to thin, giving way to something worse. The quiet belief that this was it, that I would die down here. I'd stopped listening for it. The thing, I thought maybe it had lost interest, or maybe it didn't need to hunt anymore. Then, light, flooding in from the corridor, warm and golden, not the sterile white of our headlamps, but sunlight, pure and alive, crashing through the darkness like a resurrection. And a voice, familiar, human, cracking with panic and guilt. I came back. A pause. I'm sorry I left. Are you there? Lewis. My body reacted before my mind could, but I wasn't the only one who heard him. I scrambled out of the crawl space, half crawling, half tumbling. My legs screamed, blood rushing back into numb muscles as I ran full tilt toward the hatch. The air stank of heat and rot. The moan behind me grew louder, closer. The floor shook beneath its weight. Lewis's face appeared in the open hatch above, eyes wide, flashlight in one hand. "Hey, what's going on?" he yelled. I threw myself at the ladder, missed the first rung, slammed my shin, climbed anyway. My fingers fumbled for grip, the metal slick with sweat and grime. Lewis reached down, grabbed my arm. He pulled. As my head crested the hatch, I felt the pressure shift behind me, a blast of heat and a wet sound. The thing was at the base of the ladder. I screamed. Lewis pulled harder, and I cleared the opening, just as a wet mass slammed against the underside of the hatch. He slammed it shut. The thud echoed like a gunshot, metal shaking under the impact. We stood there in the clearing, both of us heaving for breath. I bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to slow my heart. Lewis paced in wide, frantic circles, wiping sweat from his face, mouth working like he wanted to say a dozen things but couldn't pick one. Then he turned to me, eyes wide, hollow. "Where's Sasha?" he asked. I didn't answer. "What about Jonas and the professor? What happened down there? What was that thing?" My lips parted, but nothing came out. I opened my mouth again, tried to form words, but it was like they were stuck behind everything I had just seen, felt. Lewis stepped closer. "Tell me what happened." "They're gone," I finally said. They're gone." He stared at me for a long time, like he was trying to read something I couldn't put into words. Then, slowly, he pulled out his phone. "I'm calling someone," he muttered. He stepped a few feet away, murmuring into the speaker, giving what details he could. Location, injuries, urgency. I just stood there, numb, watching the hatch like it might start rattling again. But it didn't. We left before they arrived. Neither of us wanted to be there when they opened it again, if they opened it again. But we knew we had to stay, and so we did. A few days passed. The authorities came, local police first, then federal agents, and finally, someone in clean uniforms with no names on their jackets. They wouldn't say who they worked for, only that the site was under investigation and we were advised not to speak to the press. Weeks later, I got a call. Lewis was on the other end, voice low. "They found it," he said. "Everything. The bunker, the journal, all of it." "And?" I asked. He went quiet. "No bodies," he said finally. "No people. No creatures." I didn't respond. This could have only meant one thing. they got out. I'll start by saying that if I had known what this would lead to, I never would have touched it. I would have kept dragging myself through the exhaustion and creeping dread that had settled over my life. I would have let it crush me instead. But at the time, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like salvation. I was barely keeping it together, mentally, physically, and emotionally. Work was draining the life out of me. Every morning, I woke up with the same exhausted groan, accompanied by the all too familiar dull pain behind my eyes, as the realization that I had to get through another day of this hit me. My life had become a loop of meaningless emails and passive-aggressive meetings. My social life had deteriorated into scrolling through other people's happiness on Instagram. My body felt sluggish, and so did everything else. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from Jason. He was a guy I used to work with before he burned out worse than me. I hadn't heard from him in almost a year, ever since he quit his job, went through a brutal breakup, and spiraled into some kind of depressive abyss. He wanted to meet up, and when we did, I barely recognized him when he walked into the bar. Jason had always looked horrible, but as he stood in front of me, he looked like he had been reborn. His skin was clear and glowing, his eyes were sharp and full of life. Even the way he moved was different. I couldn't stop staring. "What the hell happened to you?" I finally asked. Jason just smiled, leaned back in his chair. "I figured it out." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, nondescript pill box. White. It looked like ibuprofen at first glance. He set it on the table between us. I frowned. "What's that?" Jason slid the box toward me. The answer. I picked it up, popped the lid open. Inside were dozens of small, white pills, perfectly uniform. No logo, no label. They could have been anything. I raised an eyebrow. "You selling me drugs now?" Jason laughed. "No, I don't sell them. I don't even know where to get more." I let out a dry chuckle and told him that this sounded like some rich Silicon Valley guy's new tech bro drug, some dumb optimized performance crap. But Jason just shook his head. "So, where'd you get them?" He hesitated just for a moment. Then he exhaled, like he'd made peace with something. "I can't explain it. Not in a way that'll make sense. But I don't need as many as I have, and I don't want to leave without giving you the chance." "Leave?" Jason nodded. "I'm moving, other side of the world. I don't think I'm coming back." That hit harder than I expected. Jason had been one of the few people who understood how miserable our lives had been. I set the pillbox down. "Jason, man, I don't know about this." He held up a hand, cutting me off. "You don't have to take them. I'm not pushing anything. Just try one time. If you don't like it, toss the rest." He looked so at peace, and I was so tired. I took the pill that night. It was instant. The moment the pill dissolved on my tongue, I felt something unlock inside me. Not a high, not like being drunk or stoned. Clarity. Pure, undiluted euphoria. My thoughts became razor sharp, every idea crystal clear. My body felt light. Every single inch of me just worked. I felt entirely unstoppable. I lay back in my bed, staring at the ceiling, and realized I was smiling. A deep, unshakable contentment filled my chest. For the first time in years, I felt alive. After that, there was no crash, no sluggish come down, just a perfect, dreamless sleep. The next morning, I had woken up from the best sleep of my life, but better. Like my body had been completely reset, like every ounce of exhaustion, every creeping doubt, every bit of background stress I'd been carrying for years had been scrubbed away. I breezed through work like it was nothing, every task effortless. I finished my entire workload before lunch. My boss even pulled me aside, eyes wide. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but keep it up. This is some of the best work I've seen from you." It wasn't just work. People noticed more. Conversations flowed easier. My jokes landed harder. I felt sharper, funnier, more confident than I ever had. By the end of the day, my phone was blowing up. Friends I hadn't talked to in months reaching out, wanting to hang out. I wasn't invisible anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, I had a thought circling around in my head. Why wouldn't I take another? But I also did not want to depend on this, so I would hold off for a while, see if anything went wrong. I'd convinced myself that I would only use it when things got really bad, a boost to get me back on track. Maybe it was even some kind of placebo effect, my brain waking up for the first time in years and tricking itself into feeling superhuman. But the next morning, when I rolled out of bed and felt the familiar drag of exhaustion pulling at me, I knew it had worn off. I hesitated for a while. I even went through the motions of a normal morning, but it wasn't the same. That sharp clarity I felt yesterday was gone, like a door had been shut in my brain. The temptation was there, whispering in the back of my head. Just one more. What's the harm? I gave in, easier than I'd like to admit. The second pill hit just like the first. There was no slow build-up, no waiting period. The moment I swallowed it, my mind clicked into place, like someone had turned the lights on inside my skull. The heaviness in my limbs vanished. I was instantly unburdened by hesitation or doubt. I was alive. Then I blinked, and an hour was gone. I stood in my bathroom, staring at my reflection. The last thing I remembered was taking the pill, checking the time, and heading toward the sink to brush my teeth. But now, it looked like I had just got done taking a shower. The water was running, and the clock on the wall said it was past 8. I turned off the faucet and rubbed my face, trying to shake off the feeling of something being missing. But I felt better than fine. My body was humming with energy, the same exhilarating sensation I'd felt before. Maybe I just zoned out or fallen into some kind of hyper-focused state. I wasn't about to overthink it, not when it felt this good. I moved through chores and work like they were second nature. Problems that would have normally taken me hours to work through now came with obvious solutions, as if my brain had already worked them out in the background. When my boss dropped an urgent project on my desk, expecting it to take the rest of the day, I had finished it before lunch. That afternoon, he called me into his office. "If you keep this up, we might have to talk about a real promotion." I nodded, acting cool, but inside I was thrilled. I had been stuck in this job for years, grinding through the same routine, and now, in less than a week, I was suddenly the best employee in the room. The pill was working. I decided to go out with some of the people that had written me off a long time ago, after I had bailed one too many times or let texts sit unanswered. And when I showed up, I wasn't the quiet guy in the corner. I was the one keeping conversations going, the one people actually wanted to talk to. That's how I met Mia. It wasn't anything special, at least not at first. Just a random conversation at a bar, a mutual friend introducing us over drinks. But unlike every other time I tried to flirt with someone, there was no awkwardness. The words came easily, the laughter felt natural. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers. By the end of the week, we had gone on 2 dates. At night, I stood in front of my mirror, studying my own reflection. I looked so much more confident, the same way Jason had. I wasn't going to stop, not when I had a whole box left. The night I lost the week, I was supposed to meet Mia for dinner. I'd been looking forward to it all day, but as I stood in front of my mirror, fixing my shirt, I felt something I never wanted to feel again. Sluggishness. My limbs felt heavy again. My thoughts weren't as sharp. It was nothing extreme, but it was noticeable. The kind of creeping exhaustion I'd all but tried to forget about. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the pillbox from my dresser and popped one into my mouth. It sat on my tongue for a moment before dissolving, and just like that, the fog lifted. My heartbeat steadied, my mind lit up. That was the last thing I remembered. I woke up in my bed. The first thing I noticed was the morning light bleeding through my blinds. That didn't make sense. My date had been at 7 p.m. I reached for my phone, blinking against the brightness. The screen showed the date. It was 7 days later. I sat up so fast I nearly fell out of bed. My first thought was Mia. I had missed our date. She must have been furious. And work. I had been out for a whole week. My boss was going to kill me. My bills, my emails, my texts. Everything was probably in ruins. I unlocked my phone, dreading what I was about to see. But there were no missed calls or panicked messages. I tried looking for a sign that anything was wrong, but I couldn't find anything. I scrolled through my texts, breath catching in my throat, when I saw an unread message from Mia. "Last night was amazing. I feel like I've known you forever. I can't wait to see you again." I stared at the message, rereading it over and over. We had gone on another date. I had been there. I checked my call log. I had spoken to people, texted them, replied to emails. My work schedule was completely normal. No absences. It was like I had lived the week perfectly. Except I didn't remember any of it. My hands were shaking when I decided to dial my co-worker. I had to know what was going on, and I had no other way of getting information that I could think of. He picked up almost immediately. "Yo, what's up?" I forced a casual tone. "Not much, man. Just checking in. How was work this week?" There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Rough, but you should know. You were there." My stomach dropped. I tried again. "Yeah, of course, just, it was a blur. Remind me what happened?" He started listing off projects, meetings, conversations we'd had. I hung up and called a close friend next. Same thing. "You good, man?" they asked. "You've been on fire lately. Haven't seen you this sharp in years." I could barely respond. My mouth had gone dry. Everyone remembered a week that I didn't live. My body had been awake, but I wasn't in it. The next number I called was Jason's. "This number is no longer in service." I tried again and again. Nothing. Jason was gone, probably already living life in that other country he was talking about. That night, I dumped the pillbox into the trash. I wasn't touching it ever again. But the moment I made my decision, my body betrayed me. It started with what felt like a mild headache pressing against my skull. By the next morning, the ache had grown into a full-body fever. My muscles felt like they were shredding themselves apart. My skin was too tight, too hot, crawling with 1,000 unseen insects. I curled up on my couch, drenched in sweat, gripping my stomach as waves of nausea rolled over me. I thought it would pass, but it didn't. By the second day, I couldn't think straight. My brain felt fractured, like there was something inside it trying to dig its way out. My thoughts wouldn't connect. My vision blurred. My hands shook violently whenever I tried to hold anything. At one point, I swore I heard someone whispering my name. I turned my head so fast my neck cracked, but there was no one there. By the third day, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I stopped showing up to work. The job that had felt effortless now felt impossible. Every email I tried to write came out as nonsense. I would stare at my screen for hours, my fingers frozen, my brain refusing to cooperate. My boss sent me a single message. "What's going on with you? You were doing so well." I didn't answer. My friends stopped reaching out. At first they checked in, asked if I was okay, but I was moody, volatile, paranoid. I would snap at them for no reason, then apologize the next day. Eventually, they stopped texting back. Mia was the last to go. She stuck around longer than I expected. She tried to be patient, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't understand what had changed. One night she came over, sat next to me on my couch and said, "You're different now." I didn't even argue. She left, and I didn't try to stop her. By the end of the week, I was completely alone. I had lost everything the pill had given me: my job, my friends, my mind, my body. But worst of all, I had lost who I could have been. Because I wasn't just feeling withdrawal. I was feeling hollow. Like whatever had been inside me for that missing week had taken something with it when it left. And the only way to get it back was to take another pill. I held out as long as I could. I really did. I locked myself in my apartment, trying to sweat it out, to fight through it. I promised I wouldn't touch it again. My body moved before I could stop it. I dug through the trash, hands shaking, tearing open the bag, searching for the pillbox. Halfway through, I realized how out of control I was, yet I couldn't do anything about it. I held one of the pills in my palm, staring at it. I didn't want to take it, but I didn't have a choice. I put it on my tongue and swallowed. I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and expensive perfume. Soft morning light filtered through the sheer white curtains. The bed beneath me was impossibly soft, the kind of mattress that swallowed you whole. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Then, I turned my head. A woman was sleeping beside me. Mia. My pulse spiked. I sat up too fast, the sheets tangling around me as I struggled to get free. My body felt different, stronger. This wasn't my bed. The realization settled in my stomach like a stone. I swung my legs over the side and stood up, scanning the room. It was massive. A high-rise apartment, modern and sleek, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a glittering city skyline. I had never been here before. There was a walk-in closet to my left, the door slightly ajar. Inside, racks of expensive suits and designer shoes lined the walls. The shelves held watches that cost more than my rent used to. None of it was mine. But it was. I opened the bedside drawer and found a wallet with my ID, my name, my face. I turned to the nightstand and grabbed my phone, fingers trembling as I checked the lock screen. The date stared back at me. 1 year later. I stopped breathing. A year. Not a week. A full year. The room blurred around me, a sudden rush of nausea climbing up my throat. I gripped the edge of the dresser, struggling to keep myself upright. 1 year. I had lost an entire year. But somehow, I had still been here. I unlocked my phone with shaking hands, scrolled through months of text messages I didn't recognize. At the top was a chat with Mia. My breath hitched. I opened it. We had kept dating. We had traveled together. She had sent pictures of us at expensive restaurants, on boats, in different countries. There were videos of me smiling, laughing, talking about how amazing life had been. I had proposed to her. There was a photo of her hand, a diamond ring shining against the skin. I read the messages, trying to force a single memory to the surface. But there was nothing. I was looking at someone else's life. A better life, a perfect life, and I hadn't been here to live it. I backed out of my texts and checked my bank account. The balance nearly made me drop the phone. Millions. I had become insanely wealthy. Whatever had been using my body for the past year, it had played the part flawlessly. I scrolled through emails. I had a high-powered job now, something in finance, something I knew I had never been qualified for. I had clients, colleagues who respected me. I was a completely different person, and nobody seemed to notice. Mia stirred in her bed. I flinched, She sat up, stretching, her hair falling in waves over her shoulders. She turned to me with an easy familiarity, smiling like she had done this 100 times before. "Morning, baby," she murmured, voice heavy with sleep. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stumbled out of the bedroom and into the hallway, my breath coming fast and shallow. The apartment was pristine, enormous. Every surface was sleek and polished, every piece of furniture meticulously chosen. I made my way to the kitchen, hands gripping the counter as I tried to steady myself. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't say, "Hey, I actually haven't been here for the past year. Can you tell me what happened?" My life was perfect. I had everything I had ever wanted. But none of it belonged to me. Because I wasn't the one who had built it. I took a shaky breath, trying to think. Could I fake it? Just pick up where my body had left off, learn the routines, read through my messages, figure out how to become this version of me? Or should I try to stop it, find out what really happened, make sure it never happened again? I wasn't sure what the right answer was. But then, my hand moved. Not on its own. I could feel myself doing it. I was reaching, but I wasn't making the choice. My fingers brushed against something cold and smooth on the counter. I looked down. The pill box. The same one Jason had given me. The same one I had thrown away. The same one I had sworn off forever. It was waiting. I stared at the pill in my hand. I knew what would happen, but even as I tried to resist, I felt it. That pull, that impossible temptation. I had taken one to lose an hour, one to lose a week, one to lose a year. And now, as the pill pressed against my lips, I wondered, how much would I lose this time? I've always believed the work we do at Neurovia matters, not in the vague corporate mission statement kind of way. I mean, it actually matters. We change people in ways no pill or guided meditation app ever could. Neurovia is a company that doesn't advertise. We don't need to. The right people always find us. Veterans, trauma survivors, end-of-life cases, people whose brains have been broken in ways traditional therapy can't reach. What we offer isn't healing exactly. It's something deeper, significantly more precise. In layman's terms, we build synthetic reconstructions of memory, not just playbacks, full immersions built from neural data, EEG pattern exploitations, and psychographic overlays. It's memory, yes, but experienced again, lucid, tactile, interactive. Patients are guided into pivotal scenes from their own lives and allowed to observe, process, and sometimes rewrite what's been weighing them down. Usually, these sessions are managed by an AI therapist that reacts in real time, a kind of memory-native emotional companion. And for most patients, that's more than enough. But for the outliers, the ones whose minds don't play along or whose traumas resist logic, that's where I come in. They call us transitional memory escorts. The name sounds gentler than the job actually is. We go into the memory immersion with the client like a neural co-pilot. There's a whole protocol for it. Matched brainwaves, synchronized breathing, psychological rapport testing, and a biometric tether that keeps us linked but separate. I'm not there to fix them. I'm there to keep them from sinking. It's like diving into someone's personal movie, guiding them to the credits. I've done 31 immersions over the last 4 years. I've held the hands of women watching themselves lose their children. I've stood beside soldiers forced to relive firefights in infinite loops. One man asked me to shoot him just to see if it felt real. I didn't, of course. That would have triggered a lockdown. But I thought about it. You'd be surprised how easily empathy can morph into suggestion if you're not careful. The trick is staying present without becoming a participant. Emotionally available but not vulnerable. Curious but not too deep. If you get pulled in too far, if you start to believe in the world the system builds, you can lose track of which life is yours. Luckily, that's never been a problem for me. The immersion sessions don't last long, a few hours max. The neural link is strictly regulated. 20 minutes of lead-in, 2 hours of guided immersion, 20 minutes of cooldown. It's a tight cycle. Clean. You enter together, you leave together. At least, that's how it's supposed to work. His name was Marcus Rell, 52, history of substance dependency, confirmed incarceration, suspected but never charged, involvement in multiple violent offences, including arson and homicide. His intake file was redacted in all the wrong places. We're not usually given the full story, and I've learned not to ask for it. But with Marcus, there were too many blanks to ignore. The referral came from a private source, name withheld. His eligibility clearance came stamped from above my pay grade, with the kind of formatting we usually only see on government-authorized cases. But my supervisor, Devani, looked unbothered when she handed me the assignment. "Try not to read too far into his past," she told me. "Just keep him on track and guide him out. Don't linger." I made a joke about not packing a lunch. She didn't laugh. The first time I met Marcus in person, I already didn't like him. He smiled when I walked in, like he'd been waiting a long time for me specifically. And now that I was finally here, the show could start. "Mr. Rell," I said, offering my hand. He didn't take it, just nodded and said, "Escort, right?" "Correct. I'll be your tether during the immersion. We'll—" "I know how it works." He cut me off with the same calm tone. "I read the packet, watched the videos, took the psych eval. You're the one who watches, right? Stays beside me." "That's right. I don't intervene unless necessary. I'm here to make sure you come back in one piece." Marcus stared at me for a long time. His smile stayed, but his eyes were still, unblinking, as if he were counting something in my face. "You've got a good life," he said finally. "Stable, real peaceful." "What are you?" I said, before being cut off by the intercom, letting us know that we were good to proceed on. We ran the final calibration. Our vitals aligned cleanly, no sync drift, no cognitive latency. The neural bridge was greenlit. He lay back in the chair like he was a vacation lounger. I slid into mine, tightening the cuffs and lowering the interface dome. The chamber dimmed. A low-frequency hum signaled the initialization of the memory environment. I felt a shift in my chest first, like my heartbeat had been turned into a metronome. Marcus's neural rhythm pulsed through the tether, close enough to mimic, but just far enough to remain distinct. Then, we dropped in. The memory environment always starts in fragments, like walking through fog that thickens into shape. This one came together slowly, as if reluctant to be seen. We stood on a cracked sidewalk in some half-forgotten neighborhood. The street was unfamiliar, but the lamppost beside me was the one from outside my childhood home. The sky looked like a watercolor version of late October, and the air smelled faintly of hot metal and gasoline. Memory bleed. It's common. A little of me, a lot of him. But the deeper we moved, the stranger the hybrid became. The storefronts were labelled with real names from my life. A corner shop owned by a friend's father, a dentist I hadn't seen since I was 13. But inside the windows were flickering images of someone else's nightmares. Dark hallways, rotting food, the shape of a body twitching beneath a blanket. I turned a corner and saw Marcus ahead of me, watching a house or a building burn. He didn't react. He just stood there, and then a surge of memories hit my brain. A woman screaming, then yanked backward into black water, her face contorted with rage, not fear. A small child, eyes swollen shut, fists clenched, locked in a closet, scratching the door until the wood bled. A pair of hands, Marcus's, I presumed, pressing down on someone's throat. The skin under his fingers changed colour as the pressure held. And later, needles in a basement, dirt floor, light bulbs swinging overhead. I tried to initiate grounding protocol, pull us toward the tether's orientation point, a mental beacon I could summon to shift the environment. It didn't work. Marcus turned and looked at me through the firelight. "Why would we leave?" he asked, voice smooth and distant. "This is still the beginning." I didn't answer, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I started counting the minutes. 2 hours max. I just had to keep him until the end, until the credits rolled. Once the initial memory cluster stabilized, I initialized the first phase of the tetherback sequence, a gradual withdrawal designed to ease the subject toward detachment. You start by subtly pulling the environment, shifting colors toward neutral tones, muting ambient sound, encouraging spatial collapse around shared orientation points. The world inside doesn't vanish. It just starts to let go. But Marcus didn't move. This meant that something on the outside was not functioning correctly. He continued watching the memory, a version of his old apartment, I think, melt and drift like ash in the wind. "I didn't want to do this," he said. I didn't quite know how to interpret those words, so I did all I knew how. "Marcus," I said, carefully keeping my voice calm. "We're reaching the end of the window. You've done great work here, but if we stay too long, you get stuck." He finished the sentence for me. "Yeah, I know. You people are always worried about time like it's real in here." It is. Neural stability degrades past a certain point. if we don't exit within the... I'm not leaving. He looked at me, fully present. You think this idea was mine, don't you? He muttered. I didn't respond. There was no script for this kind of refusal. We were trained for resistance, confusion, even aggression. But this was something else. I tried to summon the hard tether, manual override, a beacon pulse meant to force a disconnection in emergency cases. It activated. I felt the jolt through the shared neural thread. But we didn't move. That's when I was certain that someone was interfering from the outside. The world flickered once, like a film reel catching, then resumed exactly where it left off. Scenes kept looping and mixing with each other. My memories, Marcus's memories. I'd started to lose grip on which scenes were mine. I stood in a grimy kitchen I'd never seen before, but the counter had the same chip as the one in my first apartment. I looked out the window and saw a tree. Gnarled, diseased, unfamiliar. But I remembered climbing it. I blinked and I was in a back alley. My hand was wet, heavy. I looked down and saw blood on my fingers and a tire iron in my grip. I smelled copper, sweat, rage. Someone behind me was moaning, their voice rasping like they were trying to speak through broken teeth. But I'd never been there, and yet I remembered it. Not like watching someone else's memory, not like walking through Marcus's past. It was mine. My breath, my heartbeat, the rage behind my eyes. I remembered the surge, the moment of impact, the metallic vibration through my arm. Later, I found myself in a motel bathroom, the mirror cracked, a lighter in one hand and a rubber tourniquet in the other. My reflection looked sunken, yellowed, ruined. Every part of my body throbbed with a dull ache. The taste hit me before I realized what I was doing. My eyes rolled to the back of my head and I hit the floor hard. You see, time doesn't pass in a straight line during immersion. It folds, doubles back. You can live through the same moment 100 times and still be surprised when something changes. And something did change. When I woke up, I was no longer in memories of his. Instead, I watched him in mine. I stood on a beach I knew, my beach from my honeymoon, and Marcus was sitting beside my wife, holding a hand, laughing. I was in my childhood kitchen, and he was washing dishes while my mother hummed nearby. I walked into my own apartment and saw him sitting at my table, reading the newspaper with my name on the byline. I tried to speak, to confront him, but he looked up at me, calm as ever, and said, "You're not my guide, you know that." He folded the paper, stood slowly, and walked toward me. "You're my exit." He took another step toward me, his face serene. I backed away instinctively, but the memory space didn't budge. No matter how far I moved, he was always the same distance from me, like something had decided it liked his gravity more than mine. "Marcus," I said, voice low, "that's not how this works." "You're right," he said, tilting his head. "It's not. Not officially. I've been in prison for many decades, boy. I can't get a job with this record, let alone fix my life at my age." He spat. "So imagine my surprise when a government official reaches out to me, offering a way to not only fix my life overnight, but potentially make it better. I tried to reach for the tether again. Nothing. It was like trying to tug on a string buried in concrete. You don't get to take someone's life just because someone else said you should. He laughed softly, like I was a child saying something naive. "Oh, but I didn't choose you," he said. "You think I would care to pick anyone out of a crowd?" He glanced at the newspaper in his hand, then tossed it aside. "You ever wonder why you couldn't see my referral, why your clearance flagged, but no one said a word?" I didn't answer. "But don't worry, you weren't the only one in the dark. Most of your colleagues are clueless as well. They didn't tell me anything either, just that I was approved, that I'd be eligible for neural transition. A new beginning, they called it." His eyes locked onto mine. "They didn't offer therapy or prison or peace. They offered this, a simple infiltration and practice." "You're saying they used you?" I said slowly. "Used us?" He nodded once. "I was dying," he said. "Not sick, just empty, used up. Years of noise in my head. They said I could be fixed, but I had to be a useful guinea pig." "Useful how?" "They wanted to know if it could work. If someone could be moved, relocated, extracted from the self. They built the tech to guide people back. But what if someone could step forward instead?" I stared at him, cold rising in my spine. "And you agreed?" He shrugged. "Like I said, no other options. They gave me a path and a person. All I had to do was go through with it." He took another step. I didn't move this time. "I didn't know who you were, but like I said, you're stable, and your mind was quiet enough to let me in without fighting." My voice came out flat. "You're making a mistake." His smile widened, then he leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "No." I ran, or tried to. Running inside a memory immersion is like pushing through a dense wall of smoke. The world doesn't resist you. It just changes the rules as you move. Streets warped, hallways folded back into themselves. Every time I turned a corner, I was somewhere I'd already been. The burning house, the alley with a tire iron, the motel bathroom. Marcus wasn't chasing me. He didn't need to. I reached for the emergency override again, the internal failsafe they build into every Escort's tether. Mentally, it feels like grabbing the base of your own spine and pulling upward, a full-body signal that says, "Get me out." Nothing happened, though desperation was pushing me to try again and again. I tried, harder. I screamed for extraction, screamed for the external team to sever the link. But the sound that came out of my mouth was wrong. Not in pitch, in ownership. It was his voice. I heard Marcus's laugh curl out of my throat and echo back at me. I turned, and there he was, standing exactly as I was standing, breathing in sync with me. We stared at each other across a memoryscape that couldn't decide what it was anymore. 1 second, it was my childhood bedroom, walls covered in peeling posters. Then the motel again. He stepped forward. I stepped back. He moved again. I mirrored. And then, without warning, he lunged. We collided like two magnets in a vacuum. No resistance, just impact. A full body falling inward. I hit the ground hard, but I didn't feel pain, just disorientation, like I was spinning through every version of myself I'd ever been. We fought with memory. He pulled scenes into the space like weapons. My first kiss, now with his face, my graduation, him shaking my father's hand, my wedding, and he was standing at the altar in my place, smiling at my wife like he'd known her forever. I tried to push back, flooding the space with his memories. For a moment, he staggered, but I saw the relief in his eyes. He wanted me to bring it all back, because the more I let his life pass through me, the deeper he sank into mine. Our bodies shifted mid-struggle. My hands became his shoulders turned into mine. We rolled, twisted, blurred. The space cracked like glass around us, shards of memory slicing through me. I screamed again for extraction, but the noise that came out was a rasp, like air pulled through wet cloth, meaningless. And then, just as I felt something rip behind my eyes, the light changed, the world tilted, and the chamber door opened. Blurred figures rushed towards us, suits, masks, gloves. I heard muffled voices, felt hands grabbing my shoulders, lifting me, cold metal against skin. Detachment initiated. The neural tether groaned and split like tearing Velcro. And then, I was awake. Back in the real world, the transfer room, harsh white lights and humming equipment and recycled air. But something was off. Everything was too heavy. My chest ached, my legs felt longer, looser. I tried to move my fingers and felt a delay, like the signal had to travel further to get there. I looked down, not at my hands, knuckles scarred, nails bitten to the quick. I tried to speak, just one word. It came out gravelly, damaged. My throat clenched, and I heard the technician beside me, clipboard in hand, smiling faintly, say, "Welcome back, Mr. L," the technician said, almost mockingly. "Client emerged clean, Escort stable," she said. "High integrity sync, best numbers we've seen in a month." I tried to speak. I don't remember what I said first. Probably stop or help or wait. None of it came out right. My voice wasn't just unfamiliar. It was wrong. It carried someone else's posture. I heard Marcus Rell in every syllable. I tried to sit up, but my movements felt borrowed, unnatural. My center of gravity had shifted, like I'd learned to walk in someone else's shoes, and now the laces were tangled around my ankles. "I'm not," I started, and my voice cracked. I looked down at my hands again, hoping I'd imagined it, but the scars were still there. So was the faint prison ink smeared into the wrist. My fingers trembled. "Please," I said, turning to Devani. "Run an ID match. My neural imprint. I'm not..." She raised a hand to quiet me, the same way you'd hush someone waking up from anesthesia. "You're experiencing post-transfer fog," she said calmly. "It's not uncommon. You've been deep inside someone else's memory structure. Residual self-image distortion can last up to an hour. Just breathe." I looked at her, begging. You know me, I said. I've worked here for 4 years. I trained under Patel. I did the Callahan immersion. Ask me anything. She tilted her head, patient but dismissive. That's part of the overlay, Marcus. Your system's still sorting memory boundaries. I'm sure it'll pass. I shook my head. I'm not Marcus. He took my body. He switched with me. I'm the escort. I'm... Okay, she said gently, signaling to a nearby tech. Let's keep him off the reinforcement feeds. He's still inside the Ark. The tech nodded, typed something into a console, and the lights above dimmed slightly. I stumbled to my feet, ignoring strange painful sensations littering my body, and started looking for a mirror. I needed something objective, irrefutable. One of the walls held a viewing panel, reflective glass, just enough to make out a face. I stepped in front of it, and there he was. The man I'd watched walk through his memories like a ghost in his own life. His face now stared back at me, tired, aged, worn by hollow years I never lived. Same pale scar across the temple. Even my silence felt like his. A few hours later, a staff member I didn't recognize handed me a manila envelope. Follow the checklist. You're already pre-cleared, she said. There's a transitional housing option and a few job placements that align with your... She paused. With your profile. I opened the envelope. Inside was a pamphlet printed in soft blue and greys. The title read, Rebuilding Forward, Employment Opportunities for Rehabilitated Individuals. The back had a phone number, a smiling logo, and my name. Marcus Rell. Life was well. When I wanted a job, I worked hard and got a good one. I wanted companionship and worked through all social barriers until I met the one and settled down. My wife and I wanted a child, and through this shared desire, we had a beautiful girl. We wanted her to grow into an amazing person, and now she's top of her class in the final months of high school with a full circle of friends. Everything was perfect. Everything I ever set out to do, I'd accomplish. Yet something inside me, deep within, felt hollow. All the happiness I sought only felt surface deep. I felt like something inside me was missing. It was during a late drive from a business trip. It was between two large cities, and I was stuck in no man's land. And at the worst possible timing, I really needed to go to the bathroom. Sure, for a number one, you can pull over and wet the side of the road, but what I needed to do required things. But luckily, I spotted my salvation. I spotted lights on in a building. It wasn't too far from the main road. However, in the pitch black, it glowed like a beacon of hope. I turned in and parked up. Other cars were settled into spots, so I assumed a small gathering of people were there. I gently knocked, hoping someone would answer. However, whatever was going on inside was too noisy for my knocks to be heard. So I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The attention of the room entirely shifted to me. The first thing I noticed was how old everyone was. Whatever this club was, that was the only shared common feature. There was nothing I could ascertain from this though, so the club's function was a mystery to me. The room fell dead silent. A pin drop would echo on the walls. However, before that, I briefly saw what the fuss was about. Someone was being celebrated, standing in front of an old, ornate door. However, it wasn't some normal door. There was a strange glow from inside, but it didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. But what really caught my attention was the sound. In the brief silence, I could hear it. A strange thumping sound. However, it had a rhythmic pattern to it, almost deliberate, yet felt so natural. It was hard to describe, but I was drawn to it. I wanted to know what it was, to feel it. A man in a clean suit cleared his throat and approached me. "Welcome. Are you a new applicant to the club?" he asked politely. No, sorry. I was just driving through and really needed the bathroom. I haven't seen a service station in so long. Is that okay?" His soft smile faded before returning as he guided me to the restroom area. While doing my business, I could hear the commotion start all over again. Cheers and celebration rang out through the hall, echoing into the cubicle I was simultaneously demolishing. I was exhausted when I finished my business. A double flusher, at least. With my hands washed, I headed out, ready to go straight for the door, not wanting to intrude whatever was going on in this remote meeting hall. But all it took was a quick sideways glance for a mountain of intrigue to hold me down. I watched as a man stepped through the ornate door. He practically glowed with positivity, beaming with a pride I had never witnessed before. Others around him celebrated him like he had just achieved world peace. Even from where I stood, whether it was seeing so many people happy or something from behind the door, I felt it too in a slight way. A strange elation tingling through me. I would have stayed in place forever, just soaking in this great feeling, even if just secondhand, until I felt a grasp at my arm. "If your business is done here, you are free to leave." It was the same man from before. He said this with no hostility, a polite smile sincerely beaming at me. I was ready to leave. However, I was just too curious. I had to ask, otherwise leaving this stone unturned would haunt me for the rest of my life. "What is this place? What's going on here?" I asked. "This is the place where like-minded people meet and share a common interest," he said. However, his pause was too suspicious. "What interest? And what's behind that door?" I asked back. "The answer to both questions are the same answer," he shot back. However, he didn't actually answer the question. "So, what is it then?" I probed. "I am truly sorry. Only club members can know," he said solemnly. I was ready to get this over with and leave, but I had so many questions. "Okay, so how do I sign up?" I asked. I figured if it was just a form or a small fee, I could spare it just to satiate my curiosity. "Sadly, it is a lengthy ordeal, and not an easy one to do," he answered. "Which is?" I asked, leaving him to fill in the blanks. "I cannot answer that," he shot back. I sighed. "And why not?" I asked, annoyance in my tone. "I can only say if you are truly dedicated to joining as a member," he explained. I was done with this whole charade. Trying not to cause a scene, I simply said my goodbyes and left. But the sight of what I'd seen, the bliss those people were experiencing, never left my mind. After 5 straight days of hell due to work, my mind sought reprieve. I wanted to feel happy. My only relief was my family, watching shows with my wife and daughter and spending quality time with them. But my life felt like it was missing something grand. I wanted to feel bliss. Realizing that my life was just travel and work, the idea of joining a club sounded like a good idea. Plus, to even experience just a fraction of the happiness that I saw in those people would be a dream. So, I went back. I set out to arrive at a similar time to when I first found the place, hoping that they had a scheduled time. And when I arrived, I saw the place bustling with life once more. When I entered, I was greeted by the same man as before. "Welcome back. The bathroom is this way. Though please, try to clean up more after," he greeted. Saying that last part was the only time I saw his polite smile falter. I guess even the most well-maintained personas can crack. But I wasn't there for that. I had something else on my mind. "I want to join," I said, a little too excitedly. At this, the room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me, and their expressions were so tense that I couldn't make out what the vibe was. Even the polite man, his friendly demeanor ever present, soured his face into a more serious tone. "Are you sure about this? This is a very serious thing to accept, and though faltering might be inevitable, the consequences for even just starting can be costly," he said. But I was ready for anything, and accepted on the spot. He formally introduced himself. Randall, a name I would never forget. Randall explained to me the conditions. I was to be put through tests of life to see whether I am truly worthy to be a part of the club. However, he couldn't fully explain what the tests were. "The tests will come to you. All you have to do is participate," was all he said. The vague, cryptic instruction wasn't the strangest part. There was another step that made me question my decision to join this strange club. Randall went to a case of his stuff and pulled out an odd mixture of materials. A pile of straw, some old-looking string, and other things I didn't recognize. As quick as a flash, he fashioned it into a strange-looking doll. He handed it to me, and as I grabbed it, he held on too, staring straight into my eyes. "Do not let it go. At times when you cannot hold it, keep it on your person at all times. We will know if you fail." At this, he released his grip and left it in my hands. "The first test is loss," was the last thing Randall said to me. The ride back was surreal, the whole scenario playing over in my head. I wondered if the doll had a camera in it, or a sensor like those training baby toys new mothers use to train with. It was odd. However, I was never one to back down from a challenge. As soon as I got home, I was hit by a surprise. My wife was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table. I approached, thinking she was just up for some water. However, the look on her face told me whatever she was about to tell me weighed heavy. And when she told me, it hit me like a ton of hammers. She was sick. Whatever it was so obscure that I still cannot pronounce its name. But whatever it was too unknown for a cure. The next few weeks were a mess. Hospital visits, counselors, care staff, a pile of things I'd never dreamed of happening until our twilight years. We had planned to spend our whole lives together, and here I was, seeing her off so soon. I was a wreck. Explaining it to our teenage daughter was hard. She was old enough to have a concept of death, but way too young to be living through it. It hurt. But my wife stayed strong through it. Despite her failing health, she was still the anchor of the family. The time came. The doctors predicted it perfectly. I was sat at her bedside, holding her hand as she slipped away from the world. Still though, she was awake enough to be sharing her last moments together. My daughter was on her way, and she would arrive perfectly on time. The door creaked open, and we both turned in anticipation. But instead, a pair of police officers stood where our daughter should have been. What they told me made my world break even more. Apparently, my daughter was worried about coming too late, so she was driving hastily to the hospital. She must have been so focused on making it on time that she missed the truck slipping past a red light, which T-boned a vehicle, damn near splitting it in half. She was dead on impact. Tears filled my eyes as the heart rate monitor next to me flatlined. My whole life, everything I lived for, was gone. I was left alone to grieve, to say my goodbyes, when I felt a slight burning sensation. I reached into my jacket pocket, and there it was, the doll. It was singed black, and as I held it, I felt it heat up in a flash and disappear into a puff of ash. My hands were left black, but otherwise no pain. But this told me what caused all this. The club. I had no idea how they orchestrated everything, but this very much all qualified as loss. I stormed back to the club with no regard of restraint. I grabbed Randall by the cuff, demanding he explain everything. However, he never carried a smug look or a look of deliberate intent. His face carried the same burden I did. I looked around, and everyone had the same look. We've all experienced loss. I have no idea what you went through, but I can guarantee we went through the same, or worse. This didn't comfort me in the slightest. Why? Why did you let this happen? You could have turned me away. You could have warned me. Anything, I demanded. Because it was worth it, he responded flatly. I wanted to flip out at this and how absurd that sounded, but I didn't. Part of me wanted to see this through, even if to just hear what was next, to at least give their death reason. The next task, Randall continued, is 100 lives from 100 cities. I frowned at this. Wait, you expect me to, what, kill? There's no way I could. I was interrupted by another patron approaching me and grabbing my hand. Before I knew it, I saw he had a knife, but it wasn't pointed at me. It was being placed in my hand. I didn't have time to pull my hand away at the strange gesture before he spoke up. Don't worry, The first one's free," he yelled excitedly, before forcing my hand tight around the handle and shoving it into himself. He fell to the floor, and smiles were had as he bled out on the floor. I was too stunned to respond until fight or flight kicked in, and I just fled. I hopped in my car and drove. Just drove as far as I could for as long as I could. Before I knew it, I was at the state lines. Soaking everything in, I knew I couldn't go home, not with blood on my hands, literally. I decided to slip to the next state and stay there for a while, just in case there was heat. When hanging around a low-populated area, I noticed a homeless man, and the cogs started turning in my head. I was in a new city. No one knew I was there. It would be so easy. It was a sick thought, but I was fully enveloped in the sunken cost fallacy to turn back now. Everything I loved was gone. If I were to stop, it would have all been for nothing. I walked past him, and he held out his hand for a donation. I handed him a baked treat I had picked up, then sat at a nearby cafe. When I saw the ambulance hauling away his body in a bag, I knew it had worked. He hadn't noticed what I'd slipped in. Another city down, 98 to go. It took years. I'd gotten good at it. I took erratic routes, never travelled in a pattern, never used the same method to kill, always mixing things up. I even flew to other countries, sometimes for a point, other times simply spending time there. The point of all this was to never leave a pattern. When there are no motives, it's very hard to track down a killer, and I had no reason at all. All of my targets were picked out at random, and never out of convenience either. I took time, sometimes months, just making sure the stars were aligned to literally get away with murder. I always kept track, never with anything material. Each night I'd recite to myself each hit. I never wanted to undershoot, or worse, overshoot my goal. And slowly, the count rose until I had reached it. 100 hits in 100 different cities. I was aged now, looking like the other guests in the club. I now understood why everyone there shared that in common. I returned, a weathered man, stripped of all humanity, broken, and praying to anything that whatever was behind that door would make me whole again. Because whatever was behind there must have been special. When I witnessed part of the ceremony, not only was the person emerging from the door elated, so was everyone in the room. Something so magical that it radiated to all involved. At this point, I couldn't even imagine the creaks in my face if I tried to smile, an action long since lost on me. So to be able to feel again, to be immersed in joy, would be salvation. I made my way back to the club. It had been so long that the thought of it not being around anymore hadn't crossed my mind until I approached. However, there it was, the soft glow of the light signalling its presence in the blackness of the road. I was greeted by Randall, looking far older than when I last saw him. Some of the members from before were still there, but it looked like many had passed, most likely from old age. But new members had taken their place. Fresh faces, the passages of time wrinkled across their faces, however, bearing something I still didn't possess. Happiness. As soon as Randall saw me, recognition spread across his face. Not only recognizing who I was, but what I had done. He didn't even confirm it, so whether he was somehow keeping tabs on me or simply from my vibe, he knew the task was complete. "Are you here to use the bathroom again?" he gestured. A joke I would have chuckled at long before, but now my soul felt so sour that I couldn't even muster a polite laugh. Randall gave a signal, and everyone immediately started preparing the ceremony. The small crowd moved like clockwork, each person knowing their role in what was about to come. A woman stood near me, excitement spread across her face. While everyone was preparing, I turned to her. "What's going to happen?" I asked. I never expected a full answer, but was at least hoping for some kind of hint towards what was about to come. But all she did was turn to me and smile. She didn't give anything away, not even with a look. I was brought before the door and finally saw the glow I had seen all those years ago seep in through the cracks. Tingles ran through me, and I hadn't even went inside yet. Randall stood in front and ceremoniously opened the door. Light played around me, and I entered. What I saw, it was beyond. I had spent many nights for years imagining what was inside, if it would all be worth it. The loss, the pain, everything I'd been through, it all circled around in my head, haunting me, teasing me. But even the highest, most supreme experience I fantasized, actually seeing it trumped it tenfold. When I emerged, I came out a new man, reborn. Everything I had done felt like so much, such a high cost. However, after going through it, it now felt cheap, like I had made out like a bandit. If I had known what was inside, I would have paid the price many times over. Everyone celebrated me outside the door. It was exactly like I had first saw all those years ago, except now I was the one in the center of attention. Randall didn't say anything to ruin the moment, simply gave me a knowing nod with a smile. So, what was inside? Well, here's the thing. I can't tell you, 'cause you're not a member.